Welcome, dear listener, to a quiet journey through one of the most significant mornings of the 20th century. A morning of courage, of silence, of thousands of footsteps on wet sand, not shouted from mountaintops, but whispered across the waves, carried on the breath of men who did not know if they would live to see the sunrise. This is not a loud history. This is not a battle cry. This is sleepy history. A slow, gentle walk through the dawn of June 6, 1944, when the world held its breath and stepped forward into a new time. And if you're wondering, yes, this is a story about D-Day, about the Normandy landings, about the largest amphibious invasion in human history. And also, yes, it's meant to help you fall asleep. I know, it sounds strange. One moment you're preparing to cross the English Channel under cover of darkness, and the next, you're drifting into a peaceful rest. But that's the heart of what we do here. We remember the past not with noise, but with stillness. Not with fear, but with presence. No sudden explosions. No dramatic music. Just the soft rhythm of waves, the murmur of rain on stone roofs, the quiet breath of a young man from Kansas writing a letter he may never send. If you fall asleep before the first boat reaches the shore, that's not a problem. That's the point. Because what we're doing tonight isn't about heroism in the loud sense. It's not about flags or victories or parades. It's about the softness beneath the steel, the heartbeat beneath the helmet, the hand that reaches out not for a weapon, but for another hand in the dark. It's about the ordinary people who found themselves in an extraordinary moment, not because they sought it, but because history came to them, quietly, like the tide. And if this kind of story, slow, deep, full of breath and silence, has ever helped you let go of the day, helped you find a moment of peace in a world that rarely stops moving, then perhaps you'd consider subscribing. Not as a demand, not as a reminder, but as a quiet agreement between us that you'll return when you need to. That you'll come back to this space where time slows down, where stories are told like lullabies, where the past doesn't shout, but whispers. Because we're not done exploring. There are many more nights like this one, many more moments in history that still breathe, still ache, still comfort. And if you'd like to walk through them with me, I'll be here. Now, as the first faint traces of light begin to blur the edge of the horizon, as the wind shifts slightly and the waves continue their endless rhythm, we go back a little further. Not to the gunfire, not to the chaos, not yet. We go to the moment before, when everything was still possible, when the world was still asleep, when life, in all its fragile normalcy, continued in small ways, unaware of what morning would bring. We go to the quiet. We go to the fields of Normandy, where rain falls gently on thatched roofs, where a candle flickers in a kitchen window, where a child turns in bed, dreaming of bread and sunlight. We go to the camps across the English Channel, where men sit in silence, writing letters they may never send, staring at photographs they've looked at 1,000 times. We go to the ordinary, because it is there, in the everyday, that history begins, not with a bang, but with a breath, a pause, a single thought in the dark. This is where we start, before it all began. It is still many hours before the first pale trace of morning begins to blur the horizon over the coast of Normandy. And in this deep, suspended darkness, the world rests not in peace, but in a kind of quiet that only exists when something immense is about to begin. The rain falls steadily across the fields and villages, not with violence, but with a soft, persistent rhythm, like the steady breath of someone trying not to wake, soaking into the rich, dark soil where crops grow slowly beneath the weight of war, where potatoes and turnips push through the damp earth without knowing they are meant to feed soldiers, not families. It slips from the eaves of stone cottages with moss-covered roofs, gathers in shallow puddles along forgotten paths, and beads on the wire fences that separate one quiet life from another. each drop carrying the weight of a night that feels longer than most, as if time itself has slowed in anticipation of what is to come. And the land, drenched and still, holds its breath beneath the low, drifting clouds. In a small village near Bayeux, where the streets are narrow, and the houses lean gently toward one another as if sharing secrets, an elderly woman sits by the cold hearth in her kitchen, wrapped in a woolen shawl that has been mended so many times it is more thread than fabric, her hands folded over her knees, listening to the silence between the raindrops. She does not light a lamp, not since the blackout orders came, not since the night a German patrol knocked on her door, asking why a light had flickered behind her curtains. Since then, she moves through her home like a shadow, guided by memory and touch, measuring her life in candle wicks and spoonfuls of flour. Her son has not written in nearly a year, and her daughter-in-law, who once brought her fresh eggs every Sunday, vanished one morning after being seen speaking with a man in a long coat near the church. She does not know if they are alive, but she still sets an extra plate at the table each night, just in case, because to stop would be to admit that hope is left. And as long as she breathes, hope remains, quiet and stubborn, like the flame of a candle shielded from the wind. Farther inland, in a farmhouse surrounded by fields of grazing sheep and rows of cabbages growing in uneven patches, a young mother kneads bread dough on a wooden table, her movements slow and deliberate, each press of her palms into the rough mixture, a small act of resistance against the emptiness of war. The flour she uses is not white, not anymore, but a dull gray made from whatever grains she could barter or gather, mixed sometimes with ground acorns or sawdust to stretch it further, though she never speaks of that to her children. Her husband was taken 2 winters ago for forced labor in Germany, and though she received a letter months later saying he was alive, the handwriting was not his, and the words felt hollow, like a message meant to comfort without truth. Still, she bakes the bread every evening, shaping it into a round loaf that reminds her of the ones her own mother used to make, and she places it on the table with a small jar of wild blackberry jam, pretending just for a moment that this is an ordinary night in an ordinary life. Outside, a dog walks slowly along the edge of the yard, his paws silent on the wet grass, his nose low to the ground, not searching for food, but for familiarity, for the scent of a world that still makes sense. He does not bark, not anymore, not since the soldier shot the neighbor's dog for barking at a passing truck. Now he moves in silence, like the trees, like the river, like the people inside the houses who speak in whispers and avoid eye contact on the road. A bicycle leans against the wall of a shed, its tires flat, its frame rusting, a relic of a time when people could travel freely, when a child could ride to the next village just to see a friend. No one has ridden it in years, but no one has taken it away either, as if leaving it there is a small act of defiance, a quiet declaration that one day someone might ride it again. And yet, in the midst of occupation and silence, life continues in small, fragile ways. A child lies in a narrow bed beneath a sloped ceiling, his fingers curled around a wooden toy horse his grandfather carved before he died, dreaming not of war, but of a meadow filled with wildflowers, of a stream where fish dart between the stones, of a picnic with his parents under an apple tree that no longer exists. He does not know the names of the beaches where men will soon wade ashore, does not understand the maps being studied in London and Portsmouth, but he feels the change in the air, the way the wind carries a different weight, the way his mother pauses at the window longer than usual, staring toward the sea. He dreams of strawberries, real ones, red and sweet, not the sour little berries they find in the woods. And in his dream, he picks one and places it in his mother's hand, and she smiles, a smile he has not seen in years. Across the English Channel, on the southern coast of England, the rain falls over vast encampments where thousands of men wait in silence, their bodies tense beneath the surface calm, their minds drifting between memory and fear. The camps stretch across fields and coastal roads, marked by rows of tents, barbed wire, and the distant glow of guarded lamps. Their names unremarkable: Camp 17, Staging Area B, Weymouth Assembly Zone, but their purpose immense. These men do not know each other well, but they share the same quiet rituals. Cleaning rifles they hope not to fire, writing letters they may never send, folding photographs of loved ones and placing them carefully in inner pockets, as if proximity could protect them. They sit on crates or the edges of cots, their boots laced tightly, their gear checked and rechecked, not because they expect perfection, but because the act of preparation gives them something to hold on to in the face of the unknown. A young man from a small town in Kansas sits on a damp tarp, his back against a supply crate, a notebook open on his lap. He has started and stopped his letter to his mother 3 times, each attempt dissolving into crossed-out lines and hesitant pauses. He wants to tell her about the weather, about the food, about the strange kindness of a British woman who gave him a woolen scarf she knitted herself. But he cannot bring himself to mention the ships anchored in the harbor, the endless rows of landing craft bobbing like toys in the swell, the briefing earlier that day where an officer pointed to a map and said, "This is where you'll go in." Instead, he writes, "The sky here is gray, just like back home before a storm, but it hasn't rained yet." He does not say he is afraid. He does not say he misses the smell of cut grass or the sound of his father whistling while fixing the tractor. He folds the letter carefully, seals it in an envelope, and places it in his breast pocket, right next to a small stone his sister gave him for luck and a photograph of his dog, both of which he touches before he sleeps. In a nearby tent, a group of paratroopers sit in a loose circle, passing a flask of weak whiskey from hand to hand, no one speaking much, no one needing to. They have trained for this moment for months, jumping from towers, marching through mud, learning how to move silently through foreign fields, but no amount of training can prepare them for the weight of what lies ahead. One of them hums a tune under his breath, a melody from a radio show he used to listen to with his younger brother, a song about a train traveling west, about open roads and warm sun. The others do not join in, but they do not stop him either, because the music is not for them. It is for the version of themselves that still believes in ordinary mornings, in coffee on a porch, in letters that arrive without delay. In a field near Exeter, rows of C-47 aircraft stand like silent sentinels beneath the drizzle, their wings glistening with rain, their propellers still. Mechanics move between them with flashlights, checking fuel lines, testing radios, tightening bolts with slow, deliberate movements, as if preparing not machines, but companions for a journey they will not take. A pilot sits in the cockpit of one plane, running through a checklist he knows by heart, his fingers moving over switches and dials with the familiarity of touch. He thinks of his daughter, born just 3 months ago, whom he has never held, whose face he knows only from a photograph sent in the mail. He wonders if she will have his eyes, if she will laugh like her mother, if she will ever understand why he was gone, and whether the world she grows up in will be better because of what he is about to do. Back in a mess tent, a sergeant stares into a mug of lukewarm tea, watching the steam rise and vanish into the damp air. He has been in North Africa, in Sicily, in Italy. He has seen what war does to men, to towns, to roads that once led somewhere. He knows that tomorrow will not be clean, not orderly, not like the maps they showed in the briefing. He knows that the real story will be written in mud, in blood, in the silence between explosions, in the way a man looks at the sky before he takes his last breath. But he also knows that they go not for glory, not for conquest, but because someone must. And if it must be them, then it will be them, and they will do it with the quiet dignity of those who do not believe they are heroes, only men who showed up when called. In a cottage near Portsmouth, a woman wakes to the sound of boots on the wet road outside. She does not turn on the light. She does not get up. She lies still, listening as American soldiers pass by in the dark, their gear clinking softly, their voices hushed. She thinks of her brother, missing since Dunkirk, and of the letter she never received. She thinks of the garden she planted with marigolds and lavender, now overgrown with weeds. And she thinks, just for a moment, that perhaps this night is different, that perhaps the tide is turning, not in the sea, but in the long, slow current of war, and that somewhere, on a distant shore, a new chapter is about to begin, not with a shout, but with a whisper. And in the sky above, the clouds shift not dramatically, not with thunder or lightning, but with the slow, quiet movement of something immense beginning to turn. The wind changes direction. The barometer drops. A meteorologist in his small office in Portsmouth studies the charts, rubs his tired eyes, and makes a decision that will echo across decades. He looks out the window at the gray sea, breathes in the salt and damp, and says the words that will set everything in motion. Tomorrow. We go tomorrow. But even he does not know how those words will ripple through time, how they will mark the beginning of an end, how they will be remembered not for their volume, but for their timing, for the fact that they were spoken in a quiet room, by a man no one will ever name, at the exact moment when the weather cleared just enough for hope to cross the sea. But for now, it is still tonight. And tonight, the world is quiet, not peaceful, not safe, not free, but quiet, the kind of quiet that comes just before a breath is taken, just before a foot lifts from the ground, just before a hand reaches for a door. It is the quiet of waiting, of gathering, of something ancient and inevitable beginning to move. The kind of quiet that makes you hold your own breath without realizing it, as if your body knows before your mind, as that history is about to step forward, not with a roar, but with the soft, steady rhythm of waves approaching a shore that has waited too long for change. And somewhere, in a farmhouse near St. Mere-Église, a clock ticks once, then again, then stops. Not with a bang, not with a spark, but simply stops, as if even time itself is holding its breath, as if the gears and springs, worn by years of measuring ordinary days, have chosen this moment to pause, not out of failure, but out of reverence, as if the machine understands that what is about to happen cannot be measured in minutes or hours, but in lives, in choices, in the fragile, enduring weight of human courage. The fields are still, the sea is still, the sky is still, and in the stillness, millions of lives hang in balance, unaware that in a few short hours, the world they know will begin to dissolve, like footprints in the sand at high tide. The farmers, the mothers, the soldiers, the children, they all sleep or try to, or pretend to, each wrapped in their own private world of memory, fear, hope. And yet, beneath the surface, something is stirring, not loud, not fast, but deep, like the first tremor before an earthquake, like the first ripple before a wave, like the faintest echo of a future that has not yet found its voice. This is the last night of the old world, and though no one knows it yet, it is also the first night of the new, not because of speeches or strategies, but because of the quiet resolve in 1,000 hearts, the unspoken promise carried in pockets and prayers, the simple, extraordinary decision to move forward, even when the path is dark, even when the cost is unknown, even when all the world seems to be holding its breath. The night continues to rest over the southern coast of England, with a quality that is no longer still, but charged, as though the very air has grown heavier with unspoken intention, carrying within it the quiet hum of thousands of hearts, beating in rhythm with a decision that has already been made, but not yet spoken aloud. The rain has softened into a fine mist that clings to the wool of uniforms and the cold metal of rifles, and the darkness feels different, now not like the deep, dreamless dark of sleep, but like the pause between breaths, the moment when the body knows something is about to happen, and all the senses lean forward in response. In the vast staging areas behind the cliffs, the silence is no longer the silence of rest, but the silence of preparation, of men sitting quietly on the edges of their cots, of boots being laced one final time, of hands checking pockets to make sure the photograph is still there, the letter folded in wax paper, the small stone wrapped in cloth, the rosary worn smooth by years of touch, the pipe with no tobacco left to burn. These are not rituals of war, but rituals of memory, of connection, of the self reaching back to what it knows before stepping into what it does not, as if holding on to these small things might keep a piece of home alive, even as the world changes around them. In a tent near Weymouth, a young radio operator adjusts the dials of his set with slow, deliberate movements, his fingers tracing the cold metal as if memorizing its shape before the journey begins, listening to the static, to the faint crackle of distant voices in German and French, to the coded messages that pulse through the air like heartbeats from another world. He does not understand all of them, but he feels their urgency, their rhythm, the way certain frequencies grow more active as the hours pass, the way the pauses between transmissions feel longer, heavier, like breaths held too long. It is not a declaration, not a siren, but a whisper in the ether, a signal that the machine of war has begun to turn, slowly at first, like a great wheel waking from a long sleep, like a current deep beneath the sea beginning to shift. He does not speak of what he hears, not because he is forbidden, but because some truths are too large for words. And this one lives in the way his hands tremble slightly as he turns a knob, in the way he glances toward the door, as if expecting someone to enter and say the words he already knows are coming. Elsewhere, in a dimly lit command post, an officer studies a large map spread across a wooden table, his fingers tracing the coastline of Normandy with a pencil that never touches the paper, feeling the shape of the land beneath his fingertips as if trying to memorize its soul. He has studied this map for months, has memorized every beach, every cliff, every village marked with a small flag, but now it feels different, no longer a diagram, but a living thing, breathing beneath his touch, pulsing with the weight of what is to come. The names Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword are no longer just codes, but places where men will soon walk, where boots will sink into sand, where hands will tremble, where lives will end or begin anew. He thinks of the men under his command, not as numbers or units, but as faces he has seen in the mess tent, in the briefing room, in the quiet moments after training, men who laughed at bad jokes, who shared cigarettes, who wrote letters with shaking hands. He thinks of their laughter, their fatigue, their quiet courage, and he feels the weight of leadership not as power, but as responsibility, as the fragile thread between order and chaos, between life and death, between a decision made in a room and the 1,000 consequences it will have on a shore he has never seen. A medic from Liverpool sits on a crate outside his tent, holding a small notebook where he has written the names of the men in his unit, not because he expects to treat them all, but because writing their names feels like a promise to remember, to care, to do his best when the time comes. He has trained for this, has practiced bandaging wounds on dummies, has learned how to stop bleeding, how to calm a man in shock, how to look into eyes that are losing focus. But no training can prepare him for the smell of blood mixed with salt water, for the sound of a voice calling for a mother, for the weight of a body in his arms as he drags it from the surf. He does not speak of these fears, not aloud, but they live in the way he checks his kit one more time, in the way he touches the small Bible in his pocket, in the way he stares at the horizon, as if trying to see what lies beyond the fog, as if the future might reveal itself in the slow roll of the waves or the flight of a single gull over the water. In another corner of the camp, a group of paratroopers gather near a truck, their faces pale in the glow of a single lantern, their gear heavy on their backs, not with excitement, but with the quiet gravity of men who know they will soon be dropped into darkness over a foreign land. They do not speak much, but their silence is not empty. It is full of shared understanding, of the unspoken bond that forms when people know they will face danger together, when they have trained side by side, marched through rain, shared rations, laughed at the same tired jokes. One of them adjusts the strap of his helmet, another checks the release mechanism on his chute, a third whispers a prayer in Polish, his lips moving slowly, as if each word must be carried carefully through the dark. They are not heroes in their own minds, not legends, not symbols. They are men from small towns and cities, from farms and factories, from families who wrote letters asking them to come home safe, from lovers who kissed them goodbye at train stations, from children who do not yet understand why Daddy had to go. And now they stand here in the cold mist, waiting for the order to move, not with pride, but with a quiet resolve that comes not from speeches, but from the simple decision to show up, to be there, to do what is asked, even when the cost is unknown. A soldier from Georgia sits alone on the edge of a field, his back against a wooden post, a harmonica in his hands, not playing, but running his thumb over the metal ridges, feeling the vibration of a melody that exists only in memory. A tune his father used to play on summer evenings when the fireflies drifted over the yard and the air smelled of honeysuckle. He thinks of the porch back home, of the way his mother would call them in for supper, of the dog that used to sleep at his feet, of the quiet peace of a life that now feels like a dream. He thinks of his younger brother, who wanted to enlist too, but was turned away for poor eyesight, and of the promise he made to write every week, a promise he is not sure he can keep. He does not know if he will survive the night, but he carries the harmonica like a piece of home, like a voice that can speak when words fail, like a thread connecting him to a world that still has music, still has laughter, still has mornings where you wake up and forget, just for a second, that there is a war. In the sky above, the clouds begin to shift, not dramatically, not with thunder or lightning, but with the slow, patient movement of something vast repositioning itself, like a great beast turning in its sleep. The wind, which had been still for hours, now brushes through the trees with a new rhythm, carrying with it the faint scent of the sea, of salt and kelp and distant storms. A meteorologist in Portsmouth watches the barometer with tired eyes, noting the subtle rise in pressure, the way the stars begin to appear between the thinning layers of cloud, and he knows what this means. He knows that the storm that delayed the invasion may have passed, that the window is opening, that the decision has been made. He does not celebrate, does not call for anyone. He simply closes his notebook, steps outside, and looks toward the harbor, where the silhouettes of ships wait like sleeping giants, ready to wake, and he feels the weight of his role not in glory, but in silence, in the knowledge that his reading of the sky will send thousands of men across the sea, and that history will remember none of his name. Back in the camps, the movement begins to change. Orders are given in low voices, not shouted, but passed from man to man like a secret, like a truth too large to be spoken loudly. Boots crunch on gravel. Engines rumble to life, not all at once, but in waves, as if the machines themselves are learning to breathe again. Men stand, gather their gear, check their weapons one final time, not because they expect perfection, but because the act of checking gives them something to hold on to in the face of the unknown. A sergeant walks down a row of tents, his flashlight dim, calling names softly, making sure no one is left behind, not in body, not in spirit. His voice calm, steady, a thread of continuity in the growing current of motion. A reminder that even now, in the heart of this immense machine, there is still a human hand guiding it. In a mess tent, a cook pours tea into tin mugs, handing them out without a word. The tea is weak, the sugar rationed, but it is warm, and that is enough. Men take the mugs, blow on the steam, sip slowly, not for taste, but for the sensation of heat in their hands, for the reminder that they are still alive, still human, still capable of feeling comfort. One soldier stares into his cup, watching the liquid tremble with the vibration of a distant engine, and for a moment he is not a soldier, not a participant in history, but simply a man holding a cup of tea on a cold night, thinking of nothing in particular, just being, just breathing, just existing in a moment that belongs only to him. And in the quiet corners of the mind, dreams flicker like candle flames. A boy from Manchester thinks of the bakery where he worked before the war, of the smell of fresh bread in the morning, of the old woman who always bought a loaf and gave him a sweet, her hands wrinkled but kind. A man from Texas remembers fishing with his grandfather on a still lake, the water so clear he could see the rocks beneath, the sky reflected perfectly on its surface, the silence so complete it felt like prayer. A medic from Glasgow thinks of his sister's wedding, of the way she laughed when she tripped on her dress, of the song they danced to, slow and soft, of the way his father wiped his eyes when she walked down the aisle. These are not escapes, not distractions, they are anchors, memories that ground them in who they were before the uniform, before the war, before the weight of what is to come, memories that remind them that they are not just soldiers, but people who once lived ordinary lives, who once loved and were loved. As the first trucks begin to roll toward the docks, the rhythm of the night changes. It is no longer a stillness of waiting, but a stillness of beginning, like the moment just before a train leaves the station, when the air hums with potential, when every passenger feels the shift in gravity, the quiet understanding that movement has begun. Men climb into the vehicles, sit shoulder to shoulder, say nothing, look ahead. Some close their eyes, not to sleep, but to gather themselves. Others stare at their hands, at the dirt under their nails, at the frayed edge of a glove, as if trying to remember the last time they felt ordinary, the last time they did something as simple as mending a fence or reading a book in the sun. On the docks, the landing craft wait, bobbing gently on the swell, their ramps down, their interiors shadowed and cramped, smelling of oil, salt, and damp canvas. Sailors move between them, checking lines, securing hatches, speaking in low tones, their faces lit by the occasional flash of the signal lamp. The air is thick with salt and diesel, with the smell of wet rope and cold metal. A young sailor from Cornwall ties a knot in a rope for the 10th time, not because it needs it, but because the motion calms his hands, because it is something he can control in a world that is about to spiral beyond control. He thinks of his mother, of the cottage near the cliffs, of the way she waved from the window the day he left. He does not know if he will see her again, but he ties the knot anyway, tight and clean, because it is something real, something solid, something that exists outside of fear. And in the fields of Normandy, still unaware, the rain has stopped. The clouds begin to break in places, revealing patches of starlight over the quiet villages. A rooster crows too early, confused by the silence. A cat slips through a garden, nose to the ground, hunting not for food, but for familiarity. A clock in a farmhouse ticks once, then again, then stops, not with drama, but with the quiet finality of something that has served its time, as if the machine understands that the hours it has measured so faithfully will never be the same again. That time itself is about to fracture and reform around a single morning. The ships in the channel begin to move, not in a rush, but in a slow, deliberate procession, their wakes spreading like fingers across the dark water, their decks filled with men who stand in silence, looking toward the French coast, invisible in the distance, feeling the vibration of engines through the soles of their boots. They do not speak. They do not cheer. They simply stand, breathe, exist in the moment before action, in the space between decision and consequence. Some clutch photographs. Some whisper names. Some close their eyes and pray. All of them carry the same unspoken truth, that in a few hours, nothing will be the same, that the world they knew, the one with quiet mornings and familiar streets, will be gone, replaced by something new, something uncertain, that will demand everything they have. And yet, even now, In the heart of this immense movement, there are moments of tenderness. A sergeant hands a younger soldier his scarf, saying nothing, just nodding, a gesture so small it might go unnoticed, but one that carries the weight of care. A pilot pats the wing of his plane before climbing in, as if thanking it for the journey it is about to take. A nurse in a hospital ship writes a letter to a friend, describing the stars above the water, as if beauty still matters, as if the capacity to wonder is its own kind of resistance. These are not gestures of defiance, but affirmations of humanity, small acts that say, I am still here, I still care, I still believe in something beyond this night. The wind carries whispers, not of words, but of presence, of engines, of footsteps, of breath, of hearts beating in unison, not because they are told to, but because they are alive, because they are moving forward, because they have chosen, in their own quiet way, to be part of something larger than themselves, not for glory, not for victory, but because it feels like the right thing to do, because someone had to go, and if it had to be them, then it will be them. This is not the moment of arrival, nor the moment of impact, but the moment before, the whisper in the dark, the breath before the song, the step before the path appears, and in this moment, the world holds still, not in fear, not in silence, but in anticipation, as if all of history has leaned forward, just slightly, to listen, to feel the first tremor of change, to witness the quiet courage of ordinary people stepping into the unknown, not because they are fearless, but because they are willing, because they believe, even if only faintly, that what they do might matter, that it might make a difference, that it might help the world turn a little more toward the light. The ships move now in long, slow procession across the dark surface of the English Channel, their silhouettes cutting through the mist like shadows from another time, their wakes spreading behind them in quiet ripples that dissolve into the swell, carrying with them the weight of thousands of men who stand in silence on the decks, their boots planted firmly against the sway, their eyes fixed on the horizon where France lies hidden behind a curtain of fog and distance, not as a destination marked on a map, but as a presence felt in the breath, in the tension of the air, in the way the sea itself seems to hold its rhythm just a little longer between waves. There is no music, no shouting, no orders carried on the wind, only the low hum of engines, the creak of metal, the occasional splash of water against steel, and the soft shuffle of feet as men shift their weight, adjust their gear, breathe in the cold, salt-heavy air that fills their lungs like a promise they cannot name, like a truth they carry without speaking it aloud. Inside the landing craft, the space is tight and low, the air thick with the smell of damp wool, oil, and fear held in check, not as something to be conquered, but as a quiet companion to those who have learned to walk beside it without looking directly at its face. Men sit shoulder to shoulder on narrow benches, their helmets low over their brows, their rifles clutched tightly across their chests, not because they expect to fire them yet, but because the weight of the weapon is familiar, a small anchor in the uncertainty of the moment, a reminder that they are still holding something real, something solid, something that has not yet been taken by the sea or the sky. Some close their eyes, not to sleep, but to gather themselves, to retreat for a moment into the quiet corners of memory of a kitchen with sunlight on the floor, of a child's laugh, of a hand held in silence, of a dog that used to sleep at their feet, of a porch where their father whistled while mending a fence. Others stare at the deck beneath their boots, at the rivets in the metal, at the way water beads and trembles with the motion of the ship, as if trying to read meaning in the smallest details, as if the universe might reveal itself in the pattern of a drop rolling across steel, in the way light catches the edge of a buckle, in the rhythm of a breath that refuses to quicken. The journey is not long in distance, but it feels endless in time, each minute stretching like the fog ahead, each wave lifting the craft and lowering it with a slow, patient rhythm that matches the beating of hearts too aware of what lies beyond the shore. too conscious of the fact that this morning will not be like the ones before it, that the world they knew, the one with quiet mornings and familiar streets, will be gone by sunrise, replaced by something new, something uncertain, something that will demand everything they have without promising anything in return. There is no conversation, not really, only the occasional murmur, a name spoken softly, a question about the time, a reassurance given in a tone too low to carry far. These men do not speak of courage or victory or even survival. They speak of small things, of the tea they drank before boarding, of the way the sergeant handed out extra socks, of the letter folded in a pocket, of the photograph tucked inside a helmet. These are not distractions, but lifelines, threads connecting them to a world that still has porches and gardens and mornings without gunfire, to a version of themselves that still believed in ordinary peace. As the coastline begins to emerge from the mist, not as a clear outline, but as a darker shadow against the gray, a suggestion of cliffs and dunes rising from the sea, the tension shifts, not into panic, but into focus, like the tightening of a bowstring before the arrow is released, like the quiet gathering of breath before a song begins. Men check their gear one final time, not because it will change anything, but because the act of checking gives them something to do, something to control in a world that is slipping beyond their grasp. A soldier from Liverpool runs his fingers over the buckle of his pack, feeling the cold metal, the frayed edge of the strap, the weight of the rations inside. He thinks of the bread his mother used to bake, of the way she would call him in from the street when it was ready, of the warmth of the loaf in his hands. He does not know if he'll ever feel that warmth again, but he holds on to the memory as the craft begins to slow, as the ramp lowers with a groan of metal, as the cold water rushes in, as the moment they have trained for, feared, and carried in silence finally arrives. And then the first steps are taken not in glory, not in triumph, but in water that rises to the knees, then the waist, pulling at boots that sink into the soft sand beneath, each step a struggle against the drag of the sea and the weight of gear that was never meant to be carried through surf, against the cold that seeps through wool and leather, against the silence that feels heavier than the pack on their backs. The air is thick with spray, with the smell of salt and diesel, with the distant echo of shells exploding on the cliffs ahead, not close enough to kill yet, but near enough to remind them that they are no longer invisible. Some men stumble, not from injury, but from the sheer disorientation of moving from steel to sand, from stillness to motion, from waiting to doing. They do not look at each other, not at first, but they feel each other, the presence of bodies moving forward in the same direction, like a single organism emerging from the water, slow and deliberate, pulled forward by something deeper than orders, something older than fear. On Utah Beach, the sand is firm and slopes gently, and the resistance is lighter than expected, so much so that some men almost forget, for a moment, that they are in war. They move forward with a kind of cautious disbelief, as if the quiet might be a trick, as if the absence of bullets means they are already dead, and this is the afterlife. A young officer from Texas checks his compass, then his watch, then the map in his pocket, but his eyes keep returning to the sky, to the way the clouds are beginning to break in places, letting through faint traces of light that glisten on the wet sand. He does not feel like a hero. He feels cold, tired, and deeply aware of how young he is, how unprepared, how ordinary. But he walks forward anyway, because stopping is not an option, because the men behind him are watching, because something in him knows that movement, even slow movement, is better than stillness. That to stand still is to become a target, to become a memory, to become one of the names that will be spoken in letters no one will finish. On Omaha Beach, the world is different. Here, the sea is rougher, the sand littered with obstacles of steel and wood, the air thick with smoke, and the sharp crack of gunfire from the cliffs above, where unseen men fire from bunkers carved into the rock, their shots falling like rain on the exposed stretch of shore. Men fall before they reach the water's edge, swallowed by the surf, their bodies carried back by the tide, as if the ocean itself refuses to let them land, as if the sand rejects their weight. Those who make it to the beach press themselves into the shallow depressions at the water's edge, breathing hard, hearts pounding, not from exertion, but from the sheer weight of being alive in a place where so many are not. A medic crawls forward on his hands and knees, dragging a kit that feels heavier with every inch, his eyes scanning the beach for movement, for a hand raised, for a face that still breathes. He does not think of bravery. He thinks only of the next man, the next step, the next breath he might help someone take. And he moves forward not because he is fearless, but because fear has no place where life hangs by a thread. Elsewhere, on Gold, Juno, and Sword, the landings unfold in their own rhythms, each beach carrying its own character, its own challenges, its own quiet moments of horror and hope. In Juno, a Canadian soldier helps a wounded comrade to his feet, saying nothing, just gripping his arm and pulling him forward, both of them limping, both of them drenched, both of them moving as if pulled by an invisible thread toward the dunes, toward cover, toward the next moment where they might breathe without flinching. In Sword, a radio operator lies in the wet sand, adjusting his set with trembling hands, trying to establish contact, trying to send the message that they have landed, that they are moving, that they are still here. The static crackles in his ears, but he keeps trying, not because he believes anyone is listening, but because to stop would be to admit defeat, because silence on the radio might mean silence everywhere, and he cannot bear the thought of being the last voice. The fog still hangs over much of the coast, softening the edges of the world, blurring the lines between sea and sky, between life and death, between what is real and what might be dream. It wraps around the men like a shroud, hiding them from enemy eyes, yes, but also from each other, from themselves. In that fog, identity dissolves. Names fade. Ranks blur. What remains is movement forward, always forward through mud, through water, through fear, through the unspoken understanding that turning back is not the same as surviving, that to retreat is to carry a weight far heavier than deer, a weight made of glances, of names, of promises left unfulfilled. A man from Glasgow stumbles over a piece of wreckage, catches himself on his hands, feels the cold grit of sand between his fingers, and for a moment he thinks only of how strange it is that sand can feel so ordinary in a moment so extraordinary, that the earth remains the same even as the world changes. As the first light of dawn begins to seep through the clouds, not in brightness, but in a slow, gray diffusion that makes the world feel like an old photograph, the scale of what is happening begins to reveal itself. More landing craft arrive, their ramps lowering, their holds emptying into the surf. Jeeps splash onto the beach, their engines coughing to life. Supplies are dragged ashore in wooden crates, in sacks, in nets, as if building a new world from the water up, brick by brick, ration by ration, breath by breath. A cook from Birmingham unpacks a stove, sets it on a dry patch of sand, and begins to boil water for tea, not because anyone has asked for it, but because it is something he knows how to do, something normal, something human, something that says, even here, even now, we are still people. In a field near Utah, a paratrooper who landed hours earlier stirs in the hayloft where he took shelter, his body stiff from cold and tension. He had been dropped miles from his target, had spent the night crawling through hedgerows, avoiding patrols, listening to the distant thunder of artillery. Now, as the sound of engines and voices grows closer, he lifts his head slowly, peers through a crack in the wood, and sees American soldiers moving through the field, their helmets marked with white tape, their rifles ready. He does not stand up immediately. He watches for a long moment, as if trying to believe what he sees, as if afraid it might vanish like a dream. Then quietly he climbs down, steps into the open, and raises his hand in silence. No one cheers. No one runs to him. But one soldier nods, and that is enough. A small gesture, a quiet recognition, a thread of connection in a world torn apart. Back on the beaches, the rhythm begins to change. The initial chaos, the disorientation, the sheer weight of landing begins to give way to purpose. Medics establish aid stations behind the dunes. Engineers blow gaps in the seawalls. Officers gather their men, point toward the next objective, speak in low voices. The movement is not fast, not heroic, but steady, like the tide itself, persistent, inevitable. A young sergeant from London helps an older man out of a landing craft, not because he knows him, but because the man is struggling, his boots caught in the ramp, his face pale with fear or cold. The sergeant says nothing, just takes his arm, pulls him forward, and keeps walking, not as a leader, but as a man who understands that sometimes the only way to honor life is to help someone else carry it. And in the villages just inland, life stirs in new ways. A woman in Arromanches wakes to the sound of distant explosions, not sharp, but deep, like thunder rolling across the sky. She does not get up immediately. She lies in bed, listening, feeling the vibrations through the floor, wondering if this is the day they have whispered about for years, the day the radio spoke of in codes, the day the resistance waited for in silence. Her husband is in the hills, somewhere with the Maquis. Her son is with her, sleeping beside her, his breathing slow and even. She thinks of the bread she baked yesterday, of the candles she saved for special moments, of the small flag she has hidden in a drawer since 1940. She does not know what will happen today, but she feels, in the depth of her bones, that something has shifted, that the long night is not over, but its darkest hour may be passing. The sea continues to carry men and machines to the shore, wave after wave, like the steady pulse of a heart determined to keep beating, like a promise repeated over and over until it becomes true. The sky lightens, not into blue, but into a soft, diffused gray that makes the world feel both new and ancient, as if this morning has happened before, in another time, in another dream, as if history is not a line, but a circle returning to itself. A boy from Manchester walks forward with his unit, his rifle heavy in his hands, his breath visible in the cold air. He thinks of his mother's voice, of the way she sang to him when he was small, of the lullaby that had no words, just melody. He does not sing it aloud, but he hums it under his breath, a quiet thread of sound that weaves through the noise, that carries him forward, step by step, into the fog, into the unknown, into the day that will one day be remembered, not for the noise, but for the courage of those who walked quietly into the water and kept moving, not because they were strong, but because they chose not to stop. This is not the end of the journey, nor the moment of victory, but the beginning of the walk, the slow, wet, exhausting, determined walk across sand and sea and fear, into a future that has not yet taken shape, guided not by certainty, but by the simple, extraordinary decision to keep going, to place one foot in front of the other, to believe, even faintly, that forward is the only direction that matters, that progress is not measured in miles, but in breaths taken, in hands helped, in moments survived, in the quiet refusal to let the darkness win, not with a shout, but with a whisper, not with a flag, but with a step, not with glory, but with the steady, unbroken rhythm of human will moving forward, one man, one wave, one heartbeat at a time.
As the first light of June 6 spreads across the coast of Normandy in a slow, gray diffusion, like the memory of dawn rather than its arrival, the world beyond the beaches begins to stir, not with alarm, but with a quiet, deep awareness that something has shifted in the rhythm of the night. A subtle change in the air that cannot be seen but is felt in the bones of those who have spent years listening for signs. Those who have trained their ears to distinguish between the ordinary rumble of weather and the unmistakable pulse of war returning. In small villages nestled between hedgerows and orchards, people rise from their beds, not with panic, but with a kind of solemn recognition, as if they have been waiting for this sound their entire lives, as if the silence of occupation had always been a pause, not an end, as if the long stillness was never meant to last, only to gather strength for the moment when the world would begin to turn again. A woman in Sanctum Egli stands at her kitchen window, a cup of weak chicory coffee in her hands, feeling the vibrations through the stone sill as another distant blast echoes from the cliffs. Low and rolling like thunder over water, not loud enough to shatter glass, but present enough to wake those who have spent years waiting in silence. She does not speak. She does not call for her son. She simply watches the horizon, where smoke begins to rise in thin columns, barely visible through the mist, and she thinks of her brother, who joined the resistance in 42 and never came back, of the letter she received months later saying he had been taken, of the silence that followed. She does not know if this noise means liberation or destruction, but she feels, in the depths of her chest, that the stillness has been broken, that the long night is no longer endless, that whatever comes next, it will not be the same as what came before, that the weight of waiting has finally given way to the weight of movement. Elsewhere, in a farmhouse near Bayeux, an old man sits by the cold hearth, his hands folded over a cane, listening to the muffled thunder roll across the fields, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet certainty that the world, after years of being held in place, has begun to turn again. He has lived through one war already, and he knows the difference between the noise of battle and the silence of dread. This is not the latter. This is movement. This is action. This is the slow, inevitable return of time, no longer frozen under occupation, but flowing forward once more. He does not light a lamp. He does not wake his granddaughter. He simply sits, breathing slowly, feeling the tremors through the floorboards. Remembering another morning, long ago, when the trains carried men away and the sky filled with smoke. But this morning feels different. It does not carry the weight of departure. It carries the weight of arrival, of something coming, not leaving. In the villages along the coast, dogs begin to bark, not in fear, but in response to the deep. Rhythmic pulses coming from the sea, as if their bodies recognize the frequency of change before their minds can name it. As if the vibration in the air stirs something ancient in their blood, something that knows when the world shifts. A child stirs in bed, half awake, confused by the sound, thinking at first that it is thunder, then realizing it does not stop, does not fade, but continues in a steady, relentless rhythm, like the heartbeat of something immense waking beneath the earth. He does not cry. He listens. And in that listening, he becomes part of the moment. One more pair of ears tuned to the shift. One more heart feeling the vibration of history moving forward. Not as a spectator, but as a witness. As someone who will one day tell this morning to someone else, in a voice just as soft as this one. On the cliffs above Omaha Beach, a German sentry stands in his bunker, his rifle resting against the concrete wall, his eyes fixed on the fog-covered sea. He has been on watch for hours, cold and tired, his thoughts drifting to a letter from his mother, to the smell of fresh bread in his hometown, to the girl he danced with before the war. He heard the planes earlier, the distant drone of engines in the night, but thought little of it. Probably just another patrol, another false alarm. But now, the explosions are too frequent, too close, too continuous to ignore. He calls to his officer, his voice calm but insistent, and together they peer through binoculars at the faint shapes emerging from the mist-landing craft. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, moving steadily toward the shore. There is no panic, not yet. There is only the slow, dawning realization that what they have been waiting for has finally arrived. Not with a warning, but with the quiet inevitability of the tide. Not with a shout, but with the steady advance of men who have crossed an ocean to be here. Back in the villages, radios crackle to life in hidden rooms, in attics, in basements where members of the resistance have waited 4 years with headphones pressed to their ears, their fingers poised over notebooks, their hearts beating just a little faster. A man in can adjusts the dial of a small set. His hands trembling slightly as he hears a coded message repeated 3 times. Les sanglets longs de violins de la. The phrase means nothing to the untrained ear, but to him, it is a key, a signal, a door opening. He writes it down, folds the paper, and slips it into his coat. He does not smile. He does not celebrate. He simply stands, takes a deep breath, and steps out into the morning, knowing that in a few hours, he and others like him will move, will cut phone lines, will ambush patrols, will do what they can to support the men landing on the beaches, not for glory, but because the moment has come. And they have waited too long to look away. Because silence is no longer an option. Because action, however small, is now the only form of hope. At sea, the armada continues to advance. A vast, slow-moving forest of ships stretching across the horizon, their wakes crisscrossing like threads in a tapestry being woven in real time. Each vessel carrying not just men and machines, but the weight of decisions made in distant rooms, of promises whispered in letters, of lives suspended between what was and what might be. Sailors on destroyers watch the shore, not with excitement, but with a quiet focus. Their hands on controls, their eyes scanning for submarines, for mines, for any sign of danger. A young radio operator in a command vessel listens to the growing volume of transmissions. Confirmations, reports each voice, carrying the weight of decisions being made in real time. Each word a stitch in the fabric of what will later be called history. He does not know the names of the men on the beaches. He does not know if they are alive. But he hears their voices faint and crackling, and he knows that somewhere in the fog and the noise, people are moving forward, and that is enough. In the sky, the clouds begin to break in places, not dramatically, but gradually. As if the atmosphere itself is making space for what is happening below, as if even the weather is yielding to the weight of the moment. A few rays of light slip through, glancing off the wet sand, catching the edge of a helmet, the side of a tank being unloaded from a landing craft. These are not beams of triumph, not golden shafts from a painting, but soft, diffused traces of illumination, like the first flicker of a candle in a dark room. They do not erase the smoke, the mud, the fear, but they are there. And for those who see them, they carry a quiet message. The world is still turning. The sun has not forgotten this place. Light still finds its way through, even when everything seems lost. In a field near Gold Beach, a French farmer walks slowly toward his barn, his boots heavy with dew, his eyes fixed on the distant rumble. He does not run. He does not hide. He simply walks, his hand resting on the gate, watching as a group of British soldiers move through his orchard. Their uniforms stained with mud, their faces tired but determined. One of them turns, sees him, and raises a hand in silence. The farmer does not wave back. He does not speak, but he nods, once, slowly, and turns to fetch a jug of water from his house. It is not a grand gesture. It is not a celebration, but it is recognition. It is connection. It is the first thread of trust being woven between a people and those who have come to free them. Not with speeches, but with a look, with a nod, with a quiet understanding that they are no longer alone. In the hospitals of southern England, nurses sit up in their beds, drawn awake by the unusual silence of the night, or rather, by the absence of the usual silence. The radios have been on all morning. The telephones ring more than usual. Ambulances come and go with a new urgency. A young nurse from Bristol stands at the window of her dormitory, looking toward the sea, knowing that in a few hours the first wounded will arrive, that the operating rooms will be full, that she will hold the hands of men who cannot sleep, who whisper names in their fever. She does not feel fear. She feels readiness. She ties her hair back, checks her uniform, and walks downstairs. Not because she is told to, but because she knows her part has begun. Because care is her form of courage. Because healing is her way of moving forward with the world. In London, a woman wakes to the sound of church bells ringing, not the frantic alarm of an air raid, but a slow, deliberate peal. one tower after another joining in, spreading across the city like a wave. She sits up in bed, listens, and begins to cry, not from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming sense that something has changed. She thinks of a husband, missing since Dunkirk, of the letters she never received, of the years of waiting. She does not know if he is alive, but she knows, in this moment, that the war is no longer standing still. It is moving, and movement means hope, even if it also means more loss, even if it means more nights like this one, even if it means more waiting. But it is no longer frozen, and that, in itself, is a kind of victory. On the beaches, the rhythm of the landing intensifies. More men come ashore. More vehicles splash into the surf. More supplies are dragged across the sand, stacked behind dunes, organized with quiet efficiency. A cook from Liverpool sets up a field stove, boils water, and begins making tea for anyone who passes, not because it is ordered, but because it is something human, something normal, something that says, even here, even now, we are still people. A medic treats a wounded soldier under the partial cover of a landing craft, his hand steady, despite the noise, his voice calm as he speaks words the man may never remember. These are not acts of heroism in the loud sense. They are acts of continuity, of care, of the refusal to let the world dissolve into chaos, of the quiet insistence that even in war, there are still moments of peace. In the hedgerows beyond Utah Beach, a group of American soldiers moves slowly through the tall grass, their rifles ready, their eyes scanning the trees. They do not speak. They do not rush. They advance with the careful patience of men who know that every step could be their last, but who walk forward anyway. A young private from Iowa stops for a moment, takes a letter from his pocket, reads a line from his mother's handwriting, then tucks it back inside his jacket, close to his heart. He does not pray. He does not look up. He just breathes and keeps walking, not toward glory, but toward the next moment. The next step, the next breath, carrying with him the weight of love more than the weight of his rifle. And in the sky above, the planes continue to come, bombers returning from their runs. Fighters circling for protection, transport aircraft carrying more paratroopers to drop behind enemy lines. The air hums with their engines. A constant, low vibration that blends with the sound of the sea and the distant thunder of artillery. A pilot flying a Spitfire glances down at the coastline, sees the smoke, the movement, the tiny figures on the sand, and feels, for the first time in years, that he is not just fighting against something, but moving towards something. That the war is not just destruction, but also the slow, painful birth of a new world, one that may not come in a day, but that has begun quietly in the middle of the noise. In a village near Corentin, an elderly woman kneels in her garden, pulling weeds from between the rows of potatoes, her hands slow but steady. She hears the explosions. She sees the smoke, but she does not stop. She works, quietly, deliberately, as if tending the earth is her way of saying that life continues, that roots still grow, that even in the midst of war, there is still room for care, for patience, for the belief that someone will one day eat the food she is growing, that the future, however uncertain, still needs to be fed. The world is in motion now, not in a rush, not in chaos, but in a slow, determined unfolding, like a river finding its path around stones. Like a tide reclaiming the shore, like a breath that has been held for years finally being released into the morning air. It is happening in the silence between explosions, in the nod between strangers, in the hand that offers water, in the voice that whispers a name, in the foot that takes one more step forward. It is not loud, it is not fast, but it is real. And it is spreading not as a wave of force, but as a current of presence, of people waking up to the fact that they are no longer waiting. They are part of what is happening. From the cliffs to the villages, from the sea to the sky, from the hearts of those who fight to the hearts of those who wait. The world is no longer holding its breath, but is breathing again. Not freely, not easily, but deeply, steadily, with the quiet courage of those who have endured too much to stop now. who understand that liberation is not a single moment, but 1,000 small decisions to keep moving, to keep believing, to keep reaching, even when the path is dark, even when the cost is unknown, even when the only light is the faint glow of dawn breaking through the fog, one breath at a time, one step at a time, one heartbeat carrying the next.
As the light of June 6th continues to grow across the coast of Normandy, not in brightness, but in presence, the true nature of courage begins to reveal itself, not in grand gestures or heroic charges, but in the quiet, unspoken moments when a man stands still for only a second too long, when his hands tremble but do not let go, when his breath catches but does not fail, when he chooses to move forward, not because he is unafraid, but because fear has not won, because something deeper than instinct keeps him going, something that lives in the space between heartbeats, in the way a soldier kneels in the wet sand to help another who cannot stand, in the way a medic wipes blood from his gloves and keeps walking, in the way a young man from a small town whispers a prayer he does not believe in, just to feel the shape of words in his mouth, just to remember that he still has a voice. In a shallow trench behind Omaha Beach, a medic from Glasgow crouches beside a soldier whose leg is torn open by shrapnel, his face pale, his breath shallow and uneven, the sand beneath him dark with blood that continues to seep despite the tourniquet already in place. The medic does not speak. He does not offer false comfort. He simply works, his hands moving with a calm that belies the noise around him. The explosions, the shouts, the distant rattle of machine guns, his fingers steady as he reaches for another bandage, as he checks the pulse in the man's wrist, as he administers morphine with a hand that refuses to shake, all while the soldier whispers the name of his sister. Over and over, as if saying it might keep him alive, as if love, repeated like a mantra, could hold back the darkness. The medic listens, nods, says nothing, because he knows that sometimes the only thing stronger than pain is the sound of a voice that does not flinch, that does not look away, that stays, that bears witness, that refuses to leave, even when everything says it should. Elsewhere, on a narrow path between hedgerows near Saint-Mere-Église, a paratrooper sits with his back against a stone wall, his rifle across his knees, his eyes closed, not sleeping, but gathering himself, breathing slowly, deliberately, trying to steady the tremor in his hands, trying to quiet the voice in his head that says you are alone, you are lost, you will not survive. He had been dropped miles from his target, tangled in a church steeple, cut down by a farmer with a knife and a look of fear that said more than words ever could. Now, hours later, he does not know where his unit is, if they are alive, if they are even still fighting. But he does not run. He does not surrender. He sits, breathes, listens to the distant sounds of battle, and waits for the moment when he can move again. Not because he feels brave, but because staying still feels like defeat, because the weight of his rifle in his hands is the only proof he has that he is still part of this, that he has not vanished into the fog. A radio operator from Birmingham lies in the mud behind a collapsed sea wall, his equipment half buried in sand, his fingers working the dials with a patience that seems out of place in the chaos, adjusting frequency, tapping the side of the set, listening to the static, to the faint crackle of voices that may or may not be real. The signal is weak, the static loud, but he keeps trying, sending the same message over and over. We are on the beach. We are moving inland. Request reinforcements. He does not know if anyone is listening. He does not know if the message will ever be received. But he sends it anyway, because to stop would be to admit that no one is coming, that they are forgotten, that the world beyond the smoke and noise has turned away. And so he speaks into the void, not with hope, but with duty, with the quiet certainty that someone somewhere must be listening, that silence does not mean absence, that persistence is its own kind of faith. In a farmhouse near Colville, a French woman kneels beside a wounded American soldier, wiping his forehead with a damp cloth, her hands gentle despite the years of hardship, of fear, of silence under occupation, her movements slow and deliberate, like those of someone who has learned to care in the dark. She does not speak English. He does not speak French. But she understands the look in his eyes, the way his body tenses at every explosion, the way his hand reaches for the dog tag around his neck, as if touching it might bring him home. She gives him water, lifts his head slightly, hums a lullaby her mother once sang to her, a melody without words, just breath and memory. He does not understand the words, but he closes his eyes, and for a moment, the war is not here. It is just a woman and a man, one caring, one being cared for. Two people sharing a moment of peace in the middle of a storm that does not care for either of them. A moment so quiet, it might not have happened at all, but that did, and that matters. On the cliffs above Gold Beach, a young sergeant from Manchester presses himself into the shadow of a bunker, his breath shallow, his rifle ready, his mind replaying the last burst of machine gun fire that took two of his men, their bodies falling without a sound, their absence now a weight in his chest that feels heavier than his pack. He does not cry. He does not curse. He simply waits, listening to the wind, to the distant calls of his men, to the silence that follows each explosion, a silence that feels deeper than the noise. He thinks of his mother, of the letter he wrote the night before, of the way she used to hold his hand when he was afraid, of the way she would say, "Just breathe, love, just breathe." He does not feel like a leader. He feels like a boy who has been given too much responsibility, too soon. But when the order comes to advance, he stands, signals to his men, and moves forward, not because he wants to, but because someone must. And if it has to be him, then it will be, because courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. In a field near Utah Beach, a private from Oklahoma helps a wounded comrade crawl through tall grass, dragging him inch by inch, his own body aching from exhaustion, from the weight of gear, from the cold that has settled into his bones, his hands raw from the rough ground, his breath loud in his ears. The man cannot walk. His leg is broken, his face twisted in pain. But he does not complain. He whispers, "Thank you," once, and then falls silent. The private does not answer. He just keeps moving, his focus narrow, his world reduced to the next foot of ground, the next breath, the next moment. He does not think of medals or glory. He thinks only of getting the man to safety, of finding the aid station, of not stopping, not now, not ever, because stopping means death, and death is not an option while there is still breath in either of their lungs, while there is still a chance, however small, that both of them might see the sun rise again. A chaplain from Liverpool walks slowly along the edge of the beach, not in uniform, but in a simple coat, his hands folded, his head bowed, carrying no weapon. Only a small Bible worn at the edges from years of touch, and a list of names written in careful script. He moves from man to man, not preaching, not praying aloud, but kneeling, touching a shoulder, offering water, whispering words that are not for history, but for the moment, words that say, "You're not alone." To one, "You've done enough." To another, and to a third, who is dying. He simply holds his hand until the breathing stops, until the body relaxes, until the war, for that man, is finally over. He does not feel like a man of God. He feels like a witness, like a presence, like someone who has come not to save souls, but to remind men that they are still human, that they are seen, that they are not forgotten, that even in the end, someone was there. In the sky above, a pilot circles slowly, his fuel running low, his plane damaged by flak, smoke trailing from one engine, his hands gripping the controls with a strength that comes not from muscle, but from will, from the quiet refusal to let the machine fall before he does. He has dropped his paratroopers, completed his mission, but now he does not know if he can make it back to England. The coast is behind him. The sea stretches ahead. He does not panic. He does not call for help. He simply flies, adjusting his course, watching the fuel gauge, breathing slowly, as if the act of breathing might keep the engines alive a little longer. He thinks of his daughter, born 3 months ago, whom he has never held, of the photograph in his pocket, of the way her tiny hand curled around his finger when he visited her in the hospital. He does not cry. He just flies, 1 mile at a time, 1 breath at a time, 1 decision at a time, because to stop is not an option, and to hope is the only thing keeping him in the air. In a village near Bayeux, an elderly woman opens her door to a group of British soldiers, her hands trembling as she offers them bread and water, not because she knows they are liberators, but because they are men, because they are tired, because they are wet from the rain, and because feeding them is the only thing she can do to say, "You are not enemies, you are not ghosts, you are here, and so am I." One of the soldiers thanks her in broken French. She does not understand, but she smiles, a small, quiet smile that carries the weight of 4 years of silence, of waiting, of fear. It is not a celebration. It is a recognition. It is the first thread of peace being woven, not with treaties, but with bread and water and a look that says, "I see you," that says, "We are still here," that says, "This is real." A nurse in a field hospital near the coast sits beside a wounded soldier, holding his hand as he drifts in and out of consciousness, his lips moving as if forming words no one can hear. She does not know if he will live. She does not know if he will wake. But she stays hour after hour, because someone must, because care is not a task, but a promise. Because in the middle of war, the simplest act of staying is the loudest form of courage, the quietest rebellion against despair. She whispers his name, reads a line from a letter she found in his pocket, tells him about the garden she had back home. Anything to keep the connection alive, anything to remind him that he is not alone, that there is still a world beyond the pain, that someone is holding his hand. In the hedgerows of the Norman countryside, a young French boy watches from behind a tree as American soldiers move through the orchard, their boots heavy on the wet earth, their faces drawn with exhaustion, their rifles ready but not raised. He does not run. He does not hide. He simply watches, his heart beating fast, not from fear, but from the sudden, overwhelming sense that the men in the gray-green uniforms are not the enemy, that they are here, that the long silence is breaking. He does not speak. He does not move. But when one of the soldiers turns and looks at him, the boy lifts his hand in silence. The soldier sees him, hesitates, then raises his hand too. No words are exchanged, no flags are waved. But in that moment, something passes between them, recognition, relief, the quiet understanding that this is not the end, but the beginning, that the war is still raging, but somewhere, a child and a soldier have chosen not to look away. A cook from Cardiff stirs a pot of soup over a small fire on the beach, his hands steady despite the noise, his face calm despite the smoke. He does not wear a rifle. He does not carry a map. He carries a ladle, a kettle, a thermos of tea. Men pass by, wounded, exhausted, silent. He offers them food, not because it is ordered, but because it is something real, something human, something that says, "You are still alive, and while you are, you can eat, you can feel warmth, you can be cared for." He does not speak of heroism. He does not think of history. He thinks only of the next man, the next bowl, the next cup of tea, because in the middle of chaos, the simplest acts are the ones that keep the world from dissolving. In a bunker on the outskirts of Caen, a German soldier sits alone, his radio silent, his orders unclear, the taste of stale bread and fear in his mouth. He has not slept in 2 days. His hands shake. He thinks of his wife, of the letter he wrote, but never sent, of the garden they planted together before the war, of the way she laughed when the tomatoes grew too tall. He does not know if she is still alive. He does not know if he will ever see her again. But he does not desert. He does not surrender. He sits, listens to the distant thunder, and waits, not for victory, but for the next command, for the next moment, for the next breath, because even in defeat, there is a kind of courage, the courage to endure, to face what cannot be changed, to bear the weight of a war that no one wanted, but that everyone must live through, one breath at a time. A young woman in London sits by her radio, listening to the faint updates, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes closed. She does not know if her brother is alive. She does not know if he landed safely. But she listens, hour after hour, because to stop would be to let go, and she is not ready to let go. She thinks of the last time she saw him, of the way he smiled, of the way he hugged her before he left, of the way he said, "I'll write." She does not pray. She just listens, and in that listening, she becomes part of the moment. One more heart holding on, one more voice in the silence, one more person choosing not to look away, choosing to believe that somewhere, across the sea, he is still breathing, still moving, still trying. In the sea, a lifeboat drifts, carrying 2 wounded men, their uniforms soaked, their eyes closed, the boat rising and falling with the slow rhythm of the swell. One of them stirs, lifts his head slightly, looks toward the shore, where smoke rises into the sky, where the horizon is blurred by mist and fire. He does not speak. He just watches, as if trying to understand what they have done, what they have survived, what comes next. The other man breathes slowly, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the waves. They do not know if they will be found. They do not know if they will live. But they are here, together, on the water, carried by the same current, held by the same hope, sustained by the quiet certainty that as long as they are breathing, the story is not over. Courage is not always loud. It is not always visible. It is in the hand that reaches out, in the foot that takes one more step, in the breath that continues, even when the body wants to stop. It is in the medic who treats the 10th wound with the same care as the first, in the soldier who advances even when his legs feel like stone, in the woman who offers bread to strangers, in the boy who lifts his hand in silence. It is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it, to care despite the cost, to believe in something beyond the smoke and noise, to act when every instinct says to freeze, to speak when silence feels safer, to stay when leaving would be easier. This is not the courage of monuments, not the kind carved in stone or remembered in speeches, but the courage of moments small, quiet, unrecorded, but real, the kind that lives in the space between heartbeats, in the way a man breathes before he moves, in the way a woman holds a cup of tea for someone who cannot hold it themselves, in the way a child believes, even for a second, that peace might be possible. And it is everywhere, in every heartbeat that refuses to stop, in every hand that refuses to let go, in every breath that says, softly, without drama, without fanfare, that life continues, that presence matters, that even in the darkest morning, someone is still trying, still moving, still here. As the morning of June 6th deepens into a slow, gray afternoon, the world of Normandy remains wrapped in a fog that does not lift so much as thin, revealing glimpses of what has been hidden, the shape of a hedgerow, the outline of a farmhouse, the distant silhouette of men moving through fields where cows once grazed in peace. The noise of battle continues, but it is no longer constant, no longer chaotic. It pulses now in waves, like breath, like a heartbeat, finding its rhythm after a long stillness. And in this shifting quiet, a single moment begins to gather weight, not because of its scale, but because of the quiet truth it carries, that sometimes the turning of history does not come with a roar, but with a whisper, not on a grand stage, but on a small hill no one had ever heard of, where a few men made a choice that changed everything without knowing they were changing it. near St. Mir-Eglise, behind a line of ancient hedgerows that have stood for centuries. A group of American paratroopers takes shelter in a shallow depression, their bodies pressed into the damp earth, their breath slow, their eyes scanning the tree line ahead. They have been fighting since before dawn, trapped miles from their target, scattered by wind and fire, gathering slowly into this fragile unit of strangers, who now move as one. They are not rested. They are not whole. But they are here, and they are still moving. Their objective is a small rise in the land, barely noticeable on a map, but vital in control a hill that overlooks the only road leading inland from Utah Beach. If they take it, reinforcements can advance. If they do not, the entire operation could stall, not in days, but in hours, not from lack of courage, but from a single point of resistance left unbroken. Their leader, a young lieutenant from Iowa, sits with his back against a stone wall, studying the slope through binoculars. He does not speak. He does not issue orders yet. He simply watches, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his chest, not as fear, but as clarity. He knows that what happens next will not be remembered in history books, that no one will name a street after him, that his name will not be spoken in speeches. But he also knows that if they do not move now, if they hesitate, the window will close. The Germans are regrouping. The road will be blocked. Men will die needlessly. And so, without fanfare, without shouting, he turns to his men and says, in a voice no louder than a breath, "We go in 3 minutes. Stay low. Move when I move." There is no cheer, no salute. Just nods, slow and solemn, as each man checks his weapon, adjusts his gear, and prepares to stand, not as heroes, but as men who have decided in this quiet moment that the next step is the only one that matters. And when they do, it is not with a charge, but with a slow, deliberate advance, crouched low, moving from cover to cover, using the land itself as a shield. They do not fire unless fired upon. They do not rush. They move like shadows, like the fog that still clings to the fields, like something inevitable that cannot be stopped. A bullet whistles past, close enough to feel the air shift, but no one flinches. A man stumbles, catches himself, keeps going. Another helps a wounded comrade forward, not because he is ordered to, but because he cannot leave him behind. They are not heroes in the loud sense. They are men who have decided, in this moment, that forward is the only direction that matters, that the road ahead must be opened, not for glory, but for those who will come after them, for the ones still crossing the sea, for the ones who will need this path to survive. As they near the base of the hill, the resistance grows. Machine gun fire rakes the ground ahead, cutting through grass and soil, forcing them to press into the earth. One man falls, not dead, but wounded, his leg torn by shrapnel. A medic crawls to him, dragging his kit, his hands already moving before he arrives. He does not look up. He does not call for help. He works, quietly, efficiently, tying a tourniquet, checking for other wounds, whispering, "You're okay, you're okay," even though he does not know if it's true. The man grips his arm, says nothing, just breathes. And when the medic signals that he can move, the wounded soldier, with effort, begins to crawl forward again, dragging himself on his elbows, refusing to be left behind, not because he feels brave, but because stopping feels like surrender, and surrender is not an option while there is still breath in his lungs. At the top of the hill, a German soldier sits in a bunker, his hands on a machine gun, his eyes fixed on the movement below. He has been here since before dawn, waiting, listening, watching. He does not know the names of the men approaching. He does not hate them. He thinks of his brother, killed in Russia, of the letter from his mother that said the house was gone, of the way the world has narrowed to this moment, this weapon, this hill. He fires not with rage, but with duty, with the quiet understanding that if he does not, others will take his place, that someone must hold the line. even if the line is meaningless in the larger war. But when a grenade lands just outside the bunker, not killing him, but stunning him with its blast, he does not reach for his pistol. He does not try to run. He sits dazed, blood on his temple, and waits, not for death, but for what comes next, for the face of the man who will decide his fate. When the Americans reach the bunker, they do not shoot. They do not shout. One of them, a private from Boston, steps forward, rifle ready, but lowers it when he sees the man inside shaking, disoriented, no longer a threat. For a long moment, no one moves. Then the private reaches into his pack, pulls out a canteen, and offers it to the German. The man looks at him, confused, and takes it slowly, drinks, and hands it back. No words are exchanged. No flags are raised. But in that silence, something shifts. The hill is taken, not with blood, but with presence, with the quiet refusal to let hatred be the only answer, with the understanding that even in war, there is room for a gesture that says, "You are not an enemy right now. You are a man who is thirsty, and I can give you water." Elsewhere, in the village of Colville-sur-Mer, a French farmer walks out of his barn, a pitchfork in his hand, not as a weapon, but as a tool, as if he is going to work the field. But he is not. He is walking toward a group of German soldiers, retreating through his orchard, their movements hurried, their discipline fraying. He does not confront them. He does not speak. He simply stands in the middle of the path, blocking their way, his eyes steady, his body still. One of them raises his rifle. Another hesitates. And then, without a word, they turn and move around him, vanishing into the trees. The farmer does not cheer. He does not move. He stands there, breathing, until the sound of their footsteps fades. Then he turns and walks back to his barn, as if nothing happened, but something did. The land has reclaimed itself, not with force, but with a quiet assertion of presence, with the unspoken truth that the people are still here, and they are no longer afraid. Back on the hill, the Americans establish a perimeter, not with celebration, but with routine. They set up a radio, call in their position, mark the road as clear. A medic treats the wounded. A cook from the rear lines arrives with a thermos of coffee, passes it around in silence. The lieutenant sits on a rock, his helmet in his lap, his hands resting on his knees. He does not smile. He does not feel like a victor. He feels tired, deeply tired, and profoundly aware of the lives that were lost to take this small piece of earth. He thinks of the men who did not make it, of the letters that will never be answered, of the families who will never know how their sons died. And yet, he also knows that this hill, this quiet rise in the land, now allows others to move forward, that the road is open, that the machine of liberation has gained one more gear, one more breath, one more moment of possibility. In the sky, the clouds part for the first time that day, not dramatically, but gently, like a curtain drawn aside, and a single shaft of sunlight falls across the field, glancing off the wet grass, the metal of a discarded helmet, the edge of a rifle. It does not last long. The fog returns. The smoke thickens. But for a moment, the world is lit, not in victory, but in presence, as if the sun itself paused to witness what had happened here, not on a grand battlefield, but in a quiet corner of Normandy, where courage was measured not in distance, but in depth, where a few men chose to move forward, not because they were unafraid, but because they were needed. A nurse in a field hospital receives the news that the road to Bayeux is open. She does not cheer. She does not stop her work, but she breathes a little easier, knowing that the wounded can now be evacuated, that help can come faster, that fewer men will die waiting for a path that was once blocked. A radio operator in Portsmouth hears the message and repeats it calmly, his voice steady, his hands moving to the next task. A mother in London, listening to the radio, does not fully understand the name of the hill, but she feels, in the tone of the announcer's voice, that something has changed, that the tide has turned, not with a shout, but with a quiet certainty that the world is no longer frozen, that movement has returned, that the long night is not over, but its darkest hour may be passing. On the beaches, the rhythm of the landings grows stronger. More men come ashore. More supplies are unloaded. The chaos of the morning gives way to order, not perfect, not easy, but possible. And it is possible because of moments like this one, because of hills taken not in glory, but in silence, because of men who moved forward, not because they were fearless, but because they were needed, because someone had to go first, and if it had to be them, then it would be, and they would do it without needing to be remembered. A young paratrooper lies in the grass, his eyes closed, his body trembling from exhaustion. He does not sleep. He listens to the wind, to the distant hum of engines, to the soft voices of his comrades. He thinks of his hometown, of the library where he used to read, of the way the sun fell through the windows in the afternoon. He does not know if he will survive the week. But he knows, in this moment, that he is part of something larger than himself, not because he is a soldier, but because he chose to keep moving, to climb the hill, to take the next step, to be one of the ones who did not stop when it would have been easier to do so. In a farmhouse nearby, a woman lights a candle in the window, not because she knows the hill has been taken, but because she feels the change in the air, the way the silence is different now, less heavy, less final. She does not know if her son is alive. She does not know if the war will end tomorrow. But she lights the candle anyway, as she has done every night since 1940, not as a signal, but as a promise that she is still here, that she still believes, that she still hopes, that even in the deepest dark, a single flame can say, I am not gone. I am still waiting. I am still watching. And in the long grass at the edge of the field, a single red poppy sways in the breeze, its petals bright against the gray earth, a small, quiet defiance of the mud and blood, a reminder that life, even here, even now, finds a way to return, not with force, not with noise, but with the soft persistence of something that refuses to be erased. This is not the moment of final victory, nor the end of the war, nor a battle remembered in statues or songs, but a hill taken in silence, a choice made in the fog, a step forward when every instinct said to wait, a moment in the shadows where the world leaned forward, not with force, but with quiet resolve, where a few men, exhausted and afraid, decided that the next step was worth taking, that the road ahead mattered more than the fear behind them, that even in the darkest morning, light could be carried forward, not in flames, but in the steady rhythm of human will, one heartbeat, one breath, one silent act of courage at a time. As the afternoon deepens into a quiet dusk over Normandy, the noise of battle begins to soften, not because the fighting has ended, but because the world has grown too heavy for constant thunder, as if even the sky needs to pause and breathe after what has unfolded, as if the air itself has become saturated with the weight of footsteps that will never be taken again, with the silence of voices that spoke their last words into the wind. The light does not fade dramatically, but slips away slowly, like a hand letting go of something it can longer hold, leaving behind a soft, gray twilight that settles over the beaches, the fields, the broken hedgerows, where the day's events now rest not as triumphs or defeats, but as memories beginning to take shape in the minds of those who live them, memories that will not be told in speeches, but carried in the quiet spaces between breaths, in the way a man stares at the horizon long after the guns have fallen silent. On Omaha Beach, a soldier sits alone in the wet sand, his helmet beside him, his hands resting on his knees, staring at the water as it rolls in and out, carrying with it fragments of wood, pieces of cloth, a single boot that will never be claimed, a rifle half buried in the surf, a photograph blurred by salt and time. He does not cry. He does not speak. He simply watches, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones, not as pride, but his presence, the presence of men who stepped into the surf and did not come back, whose names will not be spoken around dinner tables, whose letters will remain unfinished, whose faces will fade slowly from photographs held by hands that no longer expect a reply. He thinks of one of them, a boy from Maine who shared his rations the night before, who laughed at a bad joke, who said, "If I don't make it, tell my mom I tried." And now he is here, and the boy is not, and the only thing he can do is sit and remember, and let the silence carry what words cannot, to honor the weight of absence with the only thing he has left, his breath, his presence, his refusal to look away. Elsewhere, in a field hospital near Bayeux, a nurse kneels beside a cot where a young man lies still, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow, each breath a struggle against the quiet that grows heavier with every passing second. She does not know his name. She does not know where he was born. But she knows he is not from here, that he came across the sea, for a reason he may not have fully understood, that he carried a photograph in his pocket, folded so many times the edges have worn thin, a picture of a woman and a child standing in front of a house with a porch swing. She takes his hand, not to comfort him, but to let him know someone is with him, that he is not alone in this final moment, that even if no one from home can be here, there is still a human touch, still a voice that whispers, "You're okay," even when it's not true. And when his breath slows, then stops, she does not let go. She stays long after the others have moved on, until the silence in the tent feels like a kind of prayer, not for heaven, but for memory, for the understanding that to witness a life ending is also to honor the life that was lived, that every breath counts, that every hand held matters. In a farmhouse near Colville, a French woman kneels in the garden, pulling weeds from between the rows of potatoes, her movements slow, deliberate, as if tending the earth is the only way she knows to say that life continues, that roots still grow, that even in the midst of war, there is still room for care. She does not speak of the soldier who died in her barn, the one her husband carried in from the road, the one who whispered a name before he closed his eyes. She does not tell her daughter. She does not write it down. But every morning she places a small stone near the back door, not as a marker, but as a quiet acknowledgement that someone passed through, that a life touched theirs, even briefly, even silently, and that it mattered, that his breath once warmed their walls, that his presence was a thread in the fabric of their survival, that he was not just a nameless soldier, but a person who bled, who spoke, who hoped. Back on the beaches, the tide begins to rise, not with force, but with the steady rhythm of something that has done this for centuries, carrying away footprints, smoothing the sand, erasing the marks of boots and wheels and blood, as if the sea itself is trying to heal the wounds it witnessed, to return the shore to something like peace. A medic walks slowly along the shore, his kit empty, his hands stained, not with urgency now, but with exhaustion. He does not search for the living. He searches for the dead, not to mourn, but to honor, to ensure that no one is left behind, that every name can be spoken, that every mother might one day know what happened to her son. He finds a dog tag half buried in the wet sand, wipes it clean, places it in his pocket. It is not a trophy. It is not a record. It is a promise to remember, to carry, to return what he can, to be the one who does not look away, who does not forget, who walks the shoreline so that others do not have to. In London, a woman sits by the radio, the dial turned low, her hands folded in her lap. She has not slept. She has listened all day, waiting for a name, a unit, a clue, but none has come. Her brother was in the first wave. She does not know if he landed. She does not know if he survived. And yet, she does not turn the radio off. She sits, breathing slowly, as if her breath might keep him alive, as if the act of waiting is itself a form of love, a quiet refusal to let go. She thinks of the last time she saw him, of the way he smiled, of the way he hugged her, of the way he said, "I'll write." And she believes, not because she has proof, but because to stop believing would be to lose him twice, because hope is not logic, but loyalty, because memory is not the past, but a living thing that breathes in the silence. A young paratrooper from Georgia sits on a crate in a quiet corner of a field camp, a letter in his hands, the paper worn from being folded and unfolded too many times. It is from his mother, written months ago, speaking of the garden, of the neighbors, of the dog that still waits by the gate every afternoon. He does not read it all the way through. He stops at a single line. "No matter what happens, I am proud of you just for being you." He closes his eyes, presses the letter to his chest, and breathes, not to cry, but to feel the weight of being loved, of being remembered, of being more than a soldier, more than a name on a list, more than a body in a war, of being someone's son, someone's brother, someone whose laugh once filled a kitchen on a Sunday morning. In a command tent near Gold Beach, an officer studies a map, his finger tracing the progress made since dawn. He does not feel triumph. He feels the weight of numbers. How many landed? How many advanced? How many did not return? He thinks of the decisions he made, of the orders he gave, of the men who followed them. He does not know if he was right. He does not know if the cost was worth it. But he knows that the road is open, that others can move forward, that the machine of liberation has begun to turn. And yet, he also knows that no victory will bring back the ones who are gone, that no strategy can measure the price of a single life, that no history book will ever capture the quiet courage of men who walked into the surf and did not come back, that their names may fade, but their presence remains in the silence they left behind. A chaplain walks along the edge of a temporary cemetery, where wooden crosses stand in straight rows, each one marked with a name, a unit, a date, or sometimes just known but to God. He does not preach. He does not pray aloud. He simply walks, touching a cross here, pausing there, feeling the presence of those who are no longer visible, but still felt. He thinks of the men he held as they died, of the words they whispered, of the hands that gripped his uniform. He does not believe he saved their souls. He believes he bore witness, that he was there, that he saw them, that he remembered their names, even if no one else ever would, that his presence was the only thing that could say, in the final moment, you are not alone. In the sky above, the clouds part briefly, not in glory, but in gentleness, and a single ray of light falls across the sea, glancing off the water like a memory returning. It does not last. The fog returns. The night deepens. But for a moment, the world is lit, not in victory, but in presence, as if the sky itself paused to acknowledge what had been lost, what had been given, what had been endured, as if even the heavens could not remain indifferent to the quiet courage of ordinary people who stepped into the unknown and did not turn back. A cook from Liverpool stirs a pot of soup over a small fire, his hands steady, his face calm. Men pass by, wounded, silent, exhausted. He offers them food, not because it is ordered, but because it is something human, something real, something that says, you are still here, and while you are, you can eat, you can feel warmth, you can be cared for. He does not speak of heroism. He does not think of history. He thinks only of the next man, the next bowl, the next cup of tea, because in the middle of loss, the simplest acts are the ones that keep the world from dissolving, that say, without words, you are seen, you are fed, you are not forgotten. In a village near Saint-Mere-Église, an old man sits by the cold hearth, his hands folded over his cane, listening to the distant rumble of artillery. He does not light a lamp. He does not call for his granddaughter. He simply sits, breathing slowly, feeling the tremors through the floorboards, remembering another war, another morning, another silence. But this morning feels different. It does not carry the weight of departure. It carries the weight of arrival, of something coming, not leaving. And yet, he also feels the weight of those who did not survive it, of the boys who will not return, of the families who will grieve in silence. He does not know if the world will be better for what happened today, but he knows that it will be different, and that difference was bought with lives, with letters never sent, with hands that reached for others in the dark and never let go. A nurse in a field hospital closes her eyes for the first time in hours, not to sleep, but to remember the faces of the men she treated, the ones who lived, the ones who did not. She does not think of medals or recognition. She thinks of the hand she held, the water she offered, the voice that whispered, "Thank you," before slipping away. She knows that she did not win the war, but she knows that she eased a moment of pain, that she was there, that she cared. And in the quiet of her heart, she understands that this, too, is courage, not loud, not remembered, but real, not in the charge, but in the stay, not in the shout, but in the whisper. In the long grass at the edge of a hedgerow, a single red poppy sways in the breeze, its petals bright against the gray earth, a small, quiet defiance of the mud and blood, a reminder that life, even here, even now, finds a way to return, not with force, not with noise, but with the soft persistence of something that refuses to be erased, that insists on beauty, even in the midst of sorrow, that blooms not because it is safe, but because it is alive. A young soldier from Manchester walks slowly through a quiet field, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the horizon. He does not feel like a liberator. He feels tired, deeply tired, and profoundly aware of the lives that were lost to take this small piece of earth. He thinks of the men who did not make it, of the letters that will never be answered, of the families who will never know how their sons died. And yet, he also knows that the road is open, that others can move forward, that the machine of liberation has gained one more breath, one more moment of possibility, that what was broken can begin to heal, not all at once, but one step at a time. In a cottage near Portsmouth, a woman kneels by the window, a photograph in her hands, the face of her husband blurred by time and tears. She does not know if he is alive. She does not know if he landed safely. But she lights a candle, places it on the sill, and whispers his name, not as a prayer, but as a promise that she is still here, that she still waits, that she still remembers, that even if he is gone, his life was not without meaning, that his courage, however quiet, mattered, that his love still warms this room, that his absence is not emptiness, but presence in another form. Loss is not a single moment. It is not a number. It is not a flag folded and handed to a family. It is a letter never sent, a photograph left in a pocket, a name whispered in the dark, a hand that reaches for one that is no longer there. It is the weight of absence, the silence where a voice used to be, the empty space at the table, the way the world continues, even when it feels like it should stop, the way grief walks beside joy, not to erase it, but to remind us of what was loved. And yet, in that loss, there is light, not bright, not loud, but soft, like the first glow of dawn after a long night. It is in the hand that offers water, in the voice that says, "You're not alone," in the step that keeps moving forward, in the breath that refuses to stop. It is in the quiet understanding that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, that love is not erased by death, that memory is its own kind of survival, that even in the deepest sorrow, something endures, not as victory, but as continuity, not as noise, but as breath. What the water carried away cannot be brought back, not in body, not in voice, not in time, but what it left behind: the courage, the care, the quiet resolve, the unbroken thread of human will remains, not in statues, not in speeches, but in the hearts of those who lived it, in the stories that will be told in whispers, in the way a single candle in a window can say, across time and distance, "I remember, I was here." It mattered, and I did not let go. As the first full day of June 6th gives way to a quiet evening over Normandy, the world does not suddenly become peaceful, but it begins to change in ways that are not loud, not celebrated, but deeply felt, like the slow return of warmth to a hand that has been cold for too long, like the first breath after holding it for years. The gunfire has not ceased. The smoke still rises from the cliffs. The sea still carries fragments of what was lost. But somewhere beneath the surface, something has shifted, not in the grand sweep of strategy, but in the quiet corners of human experience, in the way a French farmer walks to his barn without looking over his shoulder, in the way a child laughs for the first time in years, in the way a soldier hands a piece of chocolate to a girl who stares at him with wide, uncertain eyes. This is not victory. This is not an end. This is the beginning of something new, fragile, tentative, like the first green shoot rising through cracked earth, like a song that starts not with a chorus, but with a single note, barely heard, yet full of promise. In the village of Saint-Mere-Église, where paratroopers once dangled from church steeples and gunfire echoed through the square, a woman steps out of her home with a basket of potatoes, not to trade, not to hide, but to share. She walks to the house of a neighbor, an elderly man who has not spoken to anyone since his son was taken in 1943, and places the basket by his door. She does not knock. She does not call his name. She simply leaves it there, then walks back, her footsteps soft on the cobblestones. Later, the man opens the door, sees the basket, touches the cool skin of a potato, and for the first time in years, he feels seen not as a survivor, but as a neighbor, as someone still part of a world that is beginning to reconnect, thread by thread, gesture by gesture, not through speeches, but through the quiet language of care. Elsewhere, in a field near Colville-sur-Mer, a group of American soldiers helps a French farmer repair a broken fence, not because they are ordered to, but because they see the cattle wandering, because the man looks tired, because it is the right thing to do. They do not speak the same language. They use gestures, smiles, the slow patience of hands working together in the dirt. One of the soldiers finds a nail in his pack. Another lifts a post into place, and when it is done, the farmer places a hand on the young man's shoulder and says, "Merci," his voice thick with something that is not just gratitude, but recognition that this moment, small as it is, means something larger is possible, that the war is not the only truth, that kindness can grow even in soil that has known only violence, that two people from different worlds can stand together and fix something broken, not because of duty, but because they both understand what it means to care for what is yours. In the streets of Bayeux, which had stood untouched by the worst of the fighting, people begin to emerge from their homes, not in crowds, but one by one, like shadows stepping into the light. A woman sweeps the front step of her house, not for cleanliness, but as a ritual, as if the act of sweeping says, "I am still here. I still care. I still live here." A boy rides a bicycle with flat tires, his laughter echoing between the buildings, the first sound of play the town has heard in years. An old man sits on a bench, his eyes closed, feeling the sun on his face, breathing in the air as if it tastes different now, as if freedom is not a word, but a sensation, carried on the wind, felt in the way no one looks over their shoulder when a boot steps on gravel, in the way a door can be left slightly open, in the way a candle can burn behind a window without fear. At a field hospital near Gold Beach, a nurse kneels beside a wounded French resistance fighter, cleaning a wound with steady hands, speaking to him in broken French, not about medicine, but about the garden she had back home, about the way the sun fell through the trees in the afternoon. He does not respond at first, but then, slowly, he begins to speak, not of the war, but of his daughter, who was born the year he joined the Maquis, whom he has never held. The nurse listens, not as a caregiver, but as a witness, and when he finishes, she places a hand on his arm and says, "She will know who you are, not as a promise, but as a quiet truth, as if memory itself is a form of survival, as if the story of a father's courage, whispered in a tent with the smell of antiseptic in the air, might one day be told to a child who will grow up knowing she was loved, even when he could not be there." In the hedgerows beyond Utah Beach, a young paratrooper sits with a French family in their kitchen, drinking weak tea from a chipped cup, listening as the grandmother tells a story in French he does not understand, but follows through her hands, her eyes, the warmth in her voice. The family has no extra food, but they share what they have: a small piece of bread, a slice of apple, because to feed someone is to say, "You are welcome, you are safe, you are not an enemy." The soldier does not speak much. He does not need to. He sits, breathes, feels the weight of being cared for, of being seen not as a weapon, but as a person. And for the first time since he left home, he feels something like peace, not the peace of victory, but the peace of being received, of being allowed to rest, of being reminded that he is still human. In the sky above, the clouds part for a long stretch of the evening, not dramatically, but gently, and the stars begin to appear, not as distant points of light, but as companions, as if the universe itself is watching, remembering. A British pilot circles slowly over the coast, his plane damaged, his fuel low, but he does not feel fear. He feels something else, something like belonging. He sees the lights of a village flicker on, one by one after years of blackout, and for a moment he forgets he is at war. He is just a man, flying over a land that is beginning to breathe again, seeing not destruction, but life returning, not silence, but the soft glow of a world daring to believe in tomorrow. In a farmhouse near Corentin, a woman kneels in her garden, pulling weeds from between the rows of potatoes, her hands slow but steady. She hears the distant rumble of artillery, but it does not stop her. She works quietly, deliberately, as if tending the earth is her way of saying that life continues, that roots still grow, that even in the midst of war, there is still room for care, for patience, for the belief that someone will one day eat the food she is growing. A young soldier passes by, sees her, stops, and without a word, picks up a trowel and begins to help. They do not speak. They do not need to. They work side by side, not as liberator and liberated, but as two people tending to the same soil, sharing the same hope that the future, however uncertain, still needs to be fed. In the villages along the coast, radios crackle to life in hidden rooms, in attics, in basements. A man in Cannes adjusts the dial, hears a broadcast in French, not from Berlin, but from London, and for the first time in years, he listens to a voice that speaks not of order, but of hope. He does not cheer. He does not run into the street. He simply sits, breathes, and feels the weight of silence lifting, not all at once, but slowly, like a burden that has been carried for too long, finally being set down, like a door opening after years of being locked, like a letter arriving after a long wait, carrying not just words, but the presence of someone who has not forgotten you. A cook from Liverpool sets up a field stove on the edge of a village square, boiling water for tea, handing out cups to anyone who passes: soldiers, civilians, medics, children. He does not wear a rifle. He does not carry a map. He carries a ladle, a kettle, a thermos of milk. He does not speak of victory. He thinks only of the next person, the next cup, the next moment of warmth. And when a little girl approaches, shyly, he smiles, hands her a biscuit, and says, "Here you go, love," not as a soldier, but as a man who remembers his own niece back home. And in that small act, something unbreakable is restored, not through force, but through tenderness, not through conquest, but through care. In a temporary cemetery on the edge of the dunes, a chaplain walks slowly among the wooden crosses, each one marked with a name, a unit, a date, or sometimes just known but to God. He does not preach. He does not pray aloud. He simply walks, touching a cross here, pausing there, feeling the presence of those who are no longer visible, but still felt. And as he walks, he notices something. Flowers. Small, wild, growing between the rose daisies, poppies, clover. No one planted them, but they are there. And in their quiet persistence, he sees not just loss, but continuity, not just death, but the unbroken thread of life finding its way through the cracks, not with noise, but with color, not with force, but with the soft insistence that beauty still belongs here. In the fields, the hedgerows still bear the scars of battle-burned trees, broken stone, shell craters half filled with rainwater. But in the spaces between, grass begins to grow. Birds return. A rabbit darts across a path. A dog barks in the distance, not in fear, but in greeting. The land remembers peace, even when it has been forgotten by men, and it begins to heal, not all at once, but in the way roots move through soil, slowly, silently, without announcement. In a schoolhouse near Arromanches, a teacher stands before a small group of children, not with a lesson, but with a piece of chalk, drawing a sun on the blackboard, then a tree, then a house. The children watch, silent at first, then one of them says, "Like ours," and the room fills with a quiet murmur, not of joy, but of recognition that something they thought was gone forever might still exist, that the world they knew could return, not all at once, but piece by piece, not through force, but through memory, not through war, but through the simple act of drawing what was once real. In the evening, on a quiet stretch of Omaha Beach, a soldier sits in the sand, his helmet beside him, watching as the tide rolls in, carrying with it not just debris, but also small shells, smooth stones, a child's toy boat, half sunk in the surf. He does not think of battle. He thinks of his brother, who used to collect shells on the shore back home, who would line them up on the windowsill, who said each one was a story the sea had told. And for the first time in days, he smiles, not widely, but softly, as if the memory itself is a kind of return, as if the sea, which took so much, has also brought something back. In a village near St. Lai, an old man plays a tune on a broken accordion, not for an audience, but for himself, the notes slow and uneven, but full of something that cannot be silenced. A few neighbors gather, not to listen, but to be near the sound, to feel the presence of music in a world that has known only noise. And when he finishes, no one claps. But one by one, they nod and walk away, carrying the melody with them, not as a performance, but as a promise that beauty still has a place, that even after the deepest darkness, a song can still be played. The legacy of this day does not begin in speeches or parades, but here in the quiet acts of care, in the shared bread, in the hand that helps without being asked, in the child who laughs, in the flower that grows between the crosses. It is not loud. It is not fast, but it is real. And it spreads, not like fire, but like roots, slowly, quietly, beneath the surface, not demanding attention, but changing the world just the same. This is not the end of the war, nor the final victory, but the moment when the world, after years of holding its breath, begins to exhale, not in triumph, but in relief, in the quiet understanding that life, even after the deepest darkness, finds a way to return, not all at once, but one step, one breath, one gesture at a time, not through force, but through presence, not through conquest, but through the slow, steady rhythm of people choosing to care, to stay, to believe, even when the path ahead is still shrouded in fog. The legacy begins not with a shout, but with a whisper, not with a flag, but with a hand, not with a date, but with a memory of a morning when men walked into the surf, when women lit candles in windows, when children dared to believe that tomorrow might be different. And in that memory, something endures, not as glory, but as grace, not as noise, but as the soft, steady rhythm of a world learning how to live again, not perfectly, not quickly, but gently, one quiet moment at a time. As the years pass after the long dawn of June 6th, the memory of that day does not vanish, but it changes, not in sharpness, but in texture. Like a photograph left too long in a drawer, its colors softened, its edges worn, not lost, but transformed into something quieter, something that lives not in noise, but in presence, not in parades, but in the way a man pauses at the edge of a beach and removes his shoes. Not because he is told to, but because his body remembers what his mind can no longer name. The world moves on, as it must, but in certain places, in certain moments, time slows, and the past does not return, but simply stays, like the tide that never fully recedes, like a breath that lingers after it is exhaled, like a voice that no longer speaks, but is still heard in the quiet between heartbeats. In the spring of 1994, on the 50th anniversary of the landings, an old man walks slowly along Omaha Beach, his steps careful, his hands trembling slightly, not from age alone, but from the weight of being here again, from the way the light falls on the water, just as it did when he was 22, when he waded ashore with a rifle in his hands and a letter in his pocket. He does not wear a uniform. He does not carry a flag. He wears a simple coat, too heavy for the mild weather, as if he still feels the cold of that morning. He stops at the water's edge, looks down at the sand, and for a long time says nothing. Then quietly he removes his shoes and socks, places them neatly on a rock, and steps into the surf, letting the cold water rise over his feet, just as it did when he stepped forward, when the world was loud and the sky was full of noise, when he did not know if he would live to see the sun rise again. He does not cry. He does not speak. He simply stands, breathing slowly, feeling the pull of the tide, as if the sea itself might recognize him, might remember the weight of his boots, the sound of his breath, the name he whispered before he stepped forward. Elsewhere, in a small museum near Bayeux, a woman sits on a bench, her hands folded in her lap, looking at a display of letters written by soldiers in the days before the invasion. One of them's from her father, a man she never knew, who died on Gold Beach before she was born. She does not read it aloud. She reads it silently, her eyes moving slowly over the faded ink, tracing the shape of his handwriting, imagining the hand that held the pen, the heart that chose the words, the quiet courage it must have taken to write. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I will do my best. She does not feel anger. She does not feel sorrow. She feels something deeper, a quiet connection, a thread across time, a sense that he was not just a name on a list, but a man who loved, who feared, who hoped, who wrote to his sister and said, "Tell Mama I tried my best." And in that moment, he is not gone. He is here, in the silence between her breaths, in the way the light falls across the page, in the way her hand rests gently on the glass as if touching something sacred. In the villages along the coast, the children of 1944 are now grandparents, and they tell stories to their grandchildren, not of battle, but of the morning the noise began, of the way their mother lit a candle, of the soldier who gave them chocolate, of the day the world began to change. They do not speak with pride. They speak with care, with the slow rhythm of memory, as if the past is not something to be celebrated, but something to be carried, like a fragile object wrapped in cloth, handled gently, passed on with quiet hands. A boy listens, not wide-eyed, but quietly, and when his grandmother finishes, he asks, "Were you afraid?" She does not answer at first. Then she says, "Yes, but I also believed something good could come." And the boy nods, not because he understands, but because he feels the weight of the answer, the way truth lives in silence, the way courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep breathing, to keep believing, even when the world feels broken. In the fields near Saint-Mere-Église, the hedgerows have grown back, thick and tall, hiding the scars of war beneath layers of ivy and wildflowers. A farmer walks his land, not with a rifle, but with a basket, picking apples from a tree that was not there in 1944, a tree that grew from a seed carried on the wind, from a core tossed aside by a soldier long gone. He does not know the man's name. He does not know if he survived. But he eats the apple and thinks for a moment of the hand that once held the fruit, of the mouth that chewed it, of the breath that carried its taste. And in that thought, something unbroken continues, not as a monument, not as a date, but as a quiet truth, that life finds a way to return not in grand gestures, but in small, ordinary things, in the way a tree grows from what was left behind, in the way a flavor carries a memory across decades. At the American Cemetery in Colville-sur-Mer, the rows of white crosses stretch across the hill, perfectly aligned, facing the sea, not in triumph, but in peace, not as a declaration, but as a presence. Visitors come from all over the world, not to cheer, but to stand, to breathe, to feel the wind on their faces, to read the names carved in stone, to place a small flag, to leave a flower, to simply be there. A woman from Texas kneels beside a grave, places a small American flag in the grass, then sits back and closes her eyes. She does not pray. She simply breathes, feeling the presence of a man she never met, a cousin of her grandfather, whose name she learned only recently, whose story she now carries, not in words, but in silence. The grass sways in the breeze. A bird calls from a nearby tree, and for a long moment, the world is still, not in silence, but in reverence, as if even nature knows to lower its voice. In a school in London, a teacher shows her students a black and white photograph of men wading ashore, their gear heavy, their faces blurred by motion and rain. A child asks, "Were they scared?" The teacher does not say yes or no. She says, "They were human," and the class falls quiet, not because they are told to, but because they feel the weight of the answer. The way courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. The way ordinary people can do extraordinary things when the world asks too much of them. The way history is not made by heroes, but by those who simply showed up, who stepped into the water, who kept walking. In the autumn of 2009, a group of veterans gathers on a quiet stretch of Utah beach, not for a ceremony, but for each other. They sit in folding chairs, wrapped in blankets, their hands resting on canes, their eyes fixed on the horizon. They do not speak much. They do not need to. They have lived with these memories for decades, not as heroes, but as men who carried something too heavy to put down, who returned home and learned to live with silence, with dreams that would not leave, with the weight of knowing they survived when others did not. One of them hums a tune from a radio show he used to listen to back home, a melody without words. Another smiles faintly, not at the music, but at the memory it carries. And for a while, the only sound is the wind and the waves, and the soft breath of men who have outlived their war, but not their loyalty to those who did not. In a cottage near Portsmouth, a woman opens a wooden box she has kept locked for years. Inside is a uniform, carefully folded, a dog tag, a photograph of a young man in a pilot's cap, and a letter she never sent. She does not cry. She does not speak. She simply holds the photograph, feeling the weight of a love that never had a future, that ended before it could begin, that lived in letters and photographs and quiet evenings by the window. Then she places everything back, closes the box, and sets it on the shelf. She does not forget. She just learns how to carry it, how to live with the absence, how to honor a life not by mourning, but by remembering, by breathing, by being here, by lighting a candle on June 6th, by saying his name softly into the air, as if he might still hear. In the spring, the poppies return to the fields, not in rows, not by design, but where they will, their red petals bright against the green. a quiet defiance of the mud and blood that once soaked the earth. Children pick them, not knowing their meaning, but their parents do, and they say nothing, just watch, feeling the past move through the present like a current beneath the surface, like a breath passed from one generation to the next, like a story that does not need to be told to be felt. In the sky above, the clouds drift slowly, just as they did in 1944, carrying rain, then sunlight, then shadow, indifferent to history, yet part of it. A plane passes overhead, not a bomber, not a transport, but a small civilian craft, flying low, not for war, but for joy. An old man on the ground looks up, watches it go, and for a moment he is not in 2020, but in 1944, hearing the roar of engines, feeling the vibration in his chest, seeing the sky full of C-47s. Then the plane vanishes, and he is back. But something remains: the memory, the breath, the quiet understanding that the sky still holds the echoes of what once flew through it. That time does not erase, it only softens. In a library in Normandy, a young woman reads a diary written by a nurse who served on D-Day. The pages are fragile, the ink faded, but the words are clear. I did not save the world. I held a hand, I gave water, I stayed. The woman closes the book slowly, places it back on the shelf, and walks to the window, where she watches the rain fall on the garden. She does not know the nurse's name. She does not know if she survived. But she feels her presence, not as a ghost, but as a truth that care matters. That presence is its own kind of courage. That history is not only made by those who fight, but by those who stay, who kneel in the mud, who wipe a forehead, who say, "You're not alone," even when no one can hear. In the evenings, when the light fades over the coast, the wind moves through the trees, through the grass, through the rows of crosses, carrying with it not words, but whispers of names, of laughter, of letters never sent, of hands that reached for others in the dark. Locals say the wind sounds different here, softer, heavier, as if it carries more than air, as if it remembers, as if it knows the weight of footsteps that once walked this land, of breaths that were held too long, of hearts that beat in unison across the sea. And in the homes of those whose fathers, uncles, brothers never came back, the memory lives not in photographs on the wall, but in the way a song is played at dinner, in the way a silence falls when a certain word is spoken, in the way a child learns to say, "He died for something," not with pride, but with care, not with noise, but with the quiet dignity of someone who carries a name they never knew, who feels a loss they cannot name, who honors it simply by being. Time does not erase what happened on June 6th. It does not make it easier. It does not make it smaller. It simply allows the memory to settle, not in stone, not in speeches, but in the quiet places, the hands that tremble at the sound of thunder, the eyes that close when a plane flies low, the breath that catches when a name is read aloud. It allows the past to live not as a wound, but as a presence, not as noise, but as breath, not as history, but as heart, as something that does not demand attention, but simply exists, like the tide, like the wind, like the way a single candle still burns in a window on June 6th. The veterans grow fewer with each passing year, their voices softer, their steps slower, but their presence remains, not in the medals they wear, but in the way they look at the sea, in the way they speak of their comrades, in the way they say, "We were just doing our job," when the world knows they did far more, when the silence in their eyes says everything words cannot. And when they are gone, the memory will not vanish. It will live in the soil, in the wind, in the way a teacher pauses before speaking of that morning, in the way a child asks, "What was it like?" And an elder answers, not with facts, but with feeling, with the slow rhythm of someone who carries what cannot be forgotten, who knows that some mornings change the world not with noise, but with quiet courage, not with force, but with presence. The past does not shout here, but breathes in the rhythm of the tide, waits in the stillness between footsteps, remembers in the way a man removes his shoes at the water's edge, in the way a woman lights a candle for someone she never met, in the way a child picks a poppy without knowing its meaning, yet feels its weight all the same, as if the earth itself is whispering, softly, across time, that they were here, they were real, they were not forgotten. And so it is not. It is here, in the wind, in the sand, in the way a single candle still burns in a window on June 6th, not for victory, but for memory, not for glory, but for the simple, enduring truth that they were here, they were real, and they did not walk alone. As the long journey through the dawn of June 6th begins to settle into stillness, the noise of engines, the weight of boots on sand, the distant echoes of gunfire, all of it slowly fades, not because it is forgotten, but because it has been carried forward into something quieter, something deeper, something that lives not in monuments or speeches, but in the breath we take now, in the way the wind moves through the trees on a quiet morning, in the way a hand rests gently on a windowsill as the light begins to rise. This is not the end of the story. It is the moment when the story stops speaking and begins to listen, when the past no longer calls to us from history books, but whispers from the spaces between heartbeats, from the soft places where memory and feeling meet, not with urgency, but with presence, not with force, but with the gentle persistence of something that refuses to vanish, something that does not demand to be heard, but simply remains, like the tide that returns without announcement. And if you are listening now, wherever you are, whatever time it is where you lie, whether the sky outside is dark or beginning to lighten, know that you are not far from that morning. You are not separated by decades, not truly. You are here, in the same world, breathing the same air, feeling the same quiet that follows every storm, every struggle, every act of courage that asked too much and gave more than it promised. The men who walked into the surf, the women who lit candles in dark kitchens, the children who waited for fathers who never came back, they are not gone. They are here, in the way we choose to care, in the way we decide to keep going, in the way we honor the ordinary by living gently, by remembering that peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of kindness, not the silence after gunfire, but the breath that continues even when the body wants to stop, not in victory, but in the quiet decision to keep breathing, to keep moving, to keep believing that something good might still grow from broken soil. When you hear the word Normandy, it does not have to bring only images of battle, of smoke and steel, of maps with red lines. It can also bring the quiet of a beach at dawn, the softness of sand beneath bare feet, the way a single poppy grows where nothing was expected to bloom again. It can bring the memory of a letter folded in a pocket, of a hand held in silence, of a voice that said, "I'll write," even when it knew it might not. And in that, it becomes not just a date, not just a battle, but a feeling, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, people choose to move forward, not because they are unafraid, but because they believe, even faintly, that the next step matters, that their presence, however small, might be part of something larger, that their quiet courage could ripple through time and touch someone, somewhere, even now, not as a story, but as a sensation, not as history, but as a breath that matches your own. And perhaps that is what remains. Not the number of ships, not the names of generals, not the exact hour the first wave landed, but the quiet truth that thousands of ordinary people, most of them young, most of them far from home, stepped into the unknown, not for glory, but because someone had to, and if it had to be them, then it would be. They did not ask to be heroes. They simply showed up, and in doing so, they left behind something that cannot be measured, the quiet courage of presence, of staying, of walking forward when every instinct said to turn back, of breathing when the air was thick with smoke, of reaching for a hand when the world was falling apart, of believing, even in the smallest way, that tomorrow might be different, that the road ahead however dark, was worth taking one step at a time. Now, years later, that courage lives not in parades, but in the way a veteran removes his shoes at the water's edge, in the way a mother reads a letter she never sent, in the way a teacher pauses before speaking of that morning, as if the words themselves are sacred. It lives in the way we choose to remember not with noise, but with silence, not with force, but with care, not with pride, but with humility. And in that silence, we find not emptiness, but fullness, a sense that we are part of something larger, not because we fought, but because we remember, because we listen, because we allow the past to live gently within us, not as a wound, but as a presence, not as history, but as heart, not as a distant event, but as a quiet truth that moves with us, like the tide, like the wind, like the way a single candle still burns in a window on June 6th, not for victory, but for memory, not for glory, but for the simple truth that they were here, they were real, and they are not forgotten. You do not need to have been there to carry it, nor do you need to have lost someone to feel the weight, nor do you need to speak of it to honor it, because remembrance is not a duty, not a performance, but a quiet decision to let the past breathe within you, to feel its presence in the way the tide still rolls over the same sand, in the way a child picks a flower where a soldier once fell, in the way a candle still burns in a window on June 6th, not for victory, but for memory, not for glory, but for the simple truth that they were here, they were real, and they are not forgotten, that their footsteps, though washed away by the tide, left an imprint on the soul of the world, not in stone, but in spirit, not in noise, but in the soft persistence of presence, not in conquest, but in the quiet refusal to let darkness have the final word. And if you close your eyes now, you might feel it, the cool mist of the coast, the distant roll of the sea, the soft crunch of sand underfoot, the way the light begins to blur the edge of the sky. You might hear the whisper of a voice, not loud, not demanding, but gentle, saying, "You are not alone. You are not far from home. You are still here." And in that moment, the past does not belong to history. It belongs to you, not as a burden, but as a gift, the gift of knowing that even in the deepest darkness, people have chosen to walk forward, one step at a time, one breath at a time, one quiet act of courage at a time, not because they were fearless, but because they were human, and because being human meant moving forward, even when the path was dark, even when the cost was unknown, even when the only light was the faint glow of a flashlight in the fog. And so can you not in war, not in noise, but in the small choices that define a life lived with care, to stay when it's easier to leave, to care when it's easier to look away, to remember when it's easier to forget, to breathe deeply when the world feels heavy, to rest when you are tired, to be kind even when no one is watching, to speak softly when silence feels safer, to hold a hand when words fail, to believe in something beyond the immediate, beyond the visible, beyond the measurable, because these are not small things, but the quiet legacy of that morning carried forward not in speeches, but in lives, not in dates, but in breaths, not in battles, but in the way we choose to live, slowly, gently, with care, with presence, with the quiet understanding that peace is not a destination, but a decision made again and again in the smallest moments. And as you lie here, perhaps in the dark, perhaps in the early light, perhaps with the sound of rain outside, or the distant hum of a city falling quiet, know that you are part of this story, not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as a human being who has chosen, in this moment, to pause, to listen, to remember, to feel. And that is enough, more than enough. It is everything. You do not need to do more. You do not need to prove anything. You are already carrying it, simply by being here, by breathing, by allowing the weight of the world to rest without resistance, by letting the quiet hold you, as it once held them, by choosing not to turn away, by staying present, by being here, now, in this soft space between wakefulness and dream. The world still turns. The sea still breathes. The wind still carries whispers from that long dawn. And somewhere, on a quiet stretch of beach, a candle still burns in a window on June 6th. Not for victory, not for glory, but for memory. For love, for the quiet truth that they were here, they were real. And they are not forgotten, that their footsteps, though washed away by the tide, left an imprint on the soul of the world, not in stone, but in spirit, not in noise, but in the soft persistence of presence, not in conquest, but in the quiet refusal to let darkness have the final word, not in force, but in the gentle rhythm of hearts that continued beating long after the guns fell silent. And now, as this journey comes to a close, let that same quiet fill the space around you. Let the weight of the day dissolve into the stillness of the morning. Let your thoughts soften, like footprints in the sand washed away by the tide. Let your breath slow, like the waves rolling in and out, steady, patient, endless. There is no need to hold on. There is no need to remember every word. You have already carried what matters, not in your mind, but in your breath, in your stillness, in the way your heart continues to beat. Long after the story has ended, long after the last sentence fades, long after the world outside forgets, but you, for a moment, remembered. Let yourself drift, slowly, gently, into the quiet mist of morning, into the soft embrace of rest, into dreams. And know that when you return, whenever you return, there will be more stories, waiting soft, deep, full of breath and silence, stories that do not shout, but whisper, stories that do not demand, but invite, stories that walk beside you, quietly, like a friend in the fog, like a memory that never truly leaves, like a lullaby sung across decades, like a hand that reaches for yours in the dark, not to lead, but to say, you are not alone. You are not alone. You are not far from peace. You are already here, and you are already home. Thank you for staying with me through this long and quiet journey, for letting the weight of the day dissolve into the hush of this story, for breathing with it, for feeling it, for allowing yourself to be here, not as a witness from a distance, but as someone who walked softly through the mist of that morning, who felt the cold sand beneath invisible feet, who heard the distant roll of the sea and the softer sound of a breath held too long. You did not need to speak. You did not need to do anything at all. Your presence, your listening, your stillness was enough, more than enough. And it is because of moments like this, because of listeners like you, that these stories continue to be told, not in loud halls or crowded classrooms, but in the quiet spaces where memory and rest meet, where history does not shout, but whispers, where the past does not demand, but simply rests beside us, like a friend who knows when to speak and when to be silent. If this story found you in the dark, if it met you in a moment of stillness, if it helped you let go of the day just a little more deeply, then I am grateful. And if you'd like to share where in time or space you're listening from, if it's midnight in a city that never sleeps, or early morning in a village wrapped in fog, or somewhere in between, then perhaps you'd leave a word or two, not as a message to me, but as a quiet mark in the sand, a small sign that says, I was here, and I listened. It doesn't need to mean anything to anyone else. It only needs to mean that you were present, that you chose to pause, that you allowed yourself to be part of something slow, something soft, something that remembers. And if this kind of story, slow, deep, full of breath and silence, has ever helped you find a moment of peace in a world that rarely stops moving, then perhaps you'd consider subscribing, not as a demand, not as a reminder, but as a quiet agreement between us, that you'll return when you need to, that you'll come back to this space where time slows down, where stories are told like lullabies, where the past doesn't shout, but whispers. There will be more nights like this one, more mornings from long ago, more quiet footsteps through forgotten fields. And if you'd like to walk them with me, I'll be here. Now, as we close this chapter, let your thoughts dissolve into the quiet mist of morning. Let the weight of everything you carry soften, like footprints in the sand washed away by the tide. Let your breath slow, like the waves rolling in and out, steady, patient, endless. There is no need to hold on. There is no need to remember every word. You have already carried what matters, not in your mind, but in your breath, in your stillness, in the way your heart continues to beat, long after the story has ended, long after the last sentence fades, long after the world outside forgets, but you, for a moment, remembered. Let yourself drift slowly, gently, into the quiet embrace of rest, into dreams, into the deep, soft peace that comes not from having done enough, but from simply being here. And know that when you return, whenever you return, there will be more stories waiting soft, deep, full of breath and silence, stories that do not shout, but whisper, stories that do not demand, but invite, stories that walk beside you quietly, like a friend in the fog, like a memory that never truly leaves. You are not alone. You are not far from peace. You are already here, and you are already home.